Ebelstein was an ordinary town, except for one infamous old man known as the Lying Old Geyser. His only claim to fame was his ability to use basic one-star magic, a skill he wildly exaggerated while calling himself the town's great mage. His volatile temper made him a favorite target for local kids, but one boy, Derek, saw something more. He saw a chance to learn magic. Eager for attention, the old man took him in. To his shock, Derek quickly mastered mana circulation and even offensive casting. Though impressed, the man clung to his belief that only nobles could reach true power. A year later, Derek became a one-star mage. Soon after, the old man was found murdered while stealing a two-star spellbook. Only then did Derek realize the truth behind his obsession. Unbeknownst to all, Derek didn't truly belong to this world, and a system quietly began guiding his rise. 4 years passed. During that time, Derek learned about Keisha Flameheart. She was the former mistress of the now-fallen Flameheart Viscounty. Being of noble birth, she was a 3-star mage. Naturally, many mercenary groups sought her out. While staying in Eberstein, she accepted commissions for the Beldun mercenaries and took Derek under her wing. Derek had joined the group at a young age and was running around using only 1-star magic. Under Keisha's guidance, he learned a great deal from a true 3-star mage. The scene shifted to the tavern known as Beldun's Tier. Keisha and Derek sat together as she explained that it was only natural for a mage to desire climbing higher. She acknowledged Derek's talent but warned that excessive greed would only hinder his growth. Derek accepted her advice. Keisha instructed him to close his eyes and feel the mana. She told him to stay calm, locate the origin of the mana, observe its flow, imagine the desired form, and manifest it through mana. As Derek followed her guidance, he realized his mana was overwhelmingly powerful. Keisha observed silently, noting that Derek's innate mana capacity was impressive. She believed his field experience contributed to it, but what surprised her most was how stable his mana manipulation was. Suddenly, Derek's mana surged violently, causing a massive explosion. Derek was shocked, and so was Keisha. The tavern's other customers also froze in disbelief. Keisha immediately grabbed Derek's hand and silently instructed him to follow her. To the others, it looked as if a bomb had detonated. Once outside, Keisha warned Derek carefully. Nobles were extremely sensitive when it came to their privileges, and magic was the greatest privilege of all. Innate power was only considered a blessing when it belonged to nobility. On rare occasions, a commoner might reach the 3-star rank, but those people usually dedicated their entire lives to magic. What Derek had just used was a 2-star illusion spell known as auditory hallucination. Just like that, at the age of 14, Derek became a 2-star mage. A system window notified him that access to 2-star magic was now available, and that he had learned auditory hallucination. After that, Keisha continued taking Derek with her on various missions and passed down many spells. At times, she even taught him about the high society she once belonged to as a noble. A year later, Keisha received an offer she could not refuse. She had been appointed as a private tutor for the house of Count Elvester. The Elvester family was a house of margraves so powerful that even the capital's archdukes could not oppose them. Becoming a magic tutor for such high-ranking nobility was a massive blessing. Before leaving, Keisha gifted Derek a 2-star magic tome. A system window displayed Derek's learned magic list, including magic missile with full manifestation, fireball through transmutation, light creation sound barrier, auditory hallucination, summon guide fairy, direction sense, and X-ray vision. Another year passed. By the age of 16, Derek had self-taught himself 2 more 2-star spells. He had no intention of stopping there. The scene returned to Beldun's Tier Tavern. Jaden approached Derek and explained that the Duplain family wanted to contact him. Derek found the request suspicious, but Jaden laughed it off, explaining that Duplain spent gold like water and that building a good relationship would be beneficial. Derek asked what the task involved. Jaden said it was nothing major, only thinning out monsters on the outskirts of the Archduchy. Derek found it strange that such a powerful noble family would hire mercenaries for something so trivial. He decided to refuse and told Jaden to give the job to someone else. Jaden grew irritated and revealed that the nobles specifically needed a mage. The mercenary group lacked capable mages. Derek questioned why a mage was needed just to kill a few monsters. Jaden then handed Derek a single gold coin, explaining that it was only the down payment. Jaden led Derek to meet the Duplain representatives and reminded him to show respect. One client immediately objected. criticizing the idea of sending a child who had not even come of age. Though they had heard of Derrick's achievements in the Dawn War, they were disappointed. Jaden defended Derrick, insisting he was the most skilled mage he knew. The client prepared to leave, claiming the task was not suitable for a child. His wife whispered something to him, and a young girl stepped forward, introducing herself and requesting to speak with Derrick. The scene shifted to the territory of Archduke Duplain. Within minutes, Derrick wiped out all the goblins. The clients were astonished by how quickly he completed the task, and the woman who had doubted him earlier smiled. The scene returned to Beldun's tier. A girl named Peline angrily accused Derrick of becoming a noble's dog. When she learned how much gold he was earning, she immediately wanted the job for herself. She later passed out drunk. Jaden asked Derrick about his first task, and Derrick explained that it involved killing goblins. Jaden remarked that although their first impression was terrible, their pockets were undeniably deep. Derrick agreed, but pointed out that the clients had lied about their identities. He noted that a noble dispatcher was judged by youth, stamina, and social grace, yet the man possessed none of those traits. The woman claiming to be a scullery maid had hands far too clean for manual labor. The so-called apprentice inspector also seemed suspicious. Jaden reminded Derrick that mercenaries did not need to dig deeply into their clients' affairs. They simply did the job and took the money. Derrick accepted that reality, acknowledging that survival was everything in the wild. The next day, the scene returned to Archduke Duplain's territory. Derrick once again eliminated all the goblins with ease. He was praised by everyone, including Jaden, and received 2 gold coins as payment. Jaden patted his head proudly. A client then presented Derrick with another commission, authorized directly by the Archduke's estate. The reward was 15 gold coins. Jaden was left speechless. Derrick agreed to take the job. The group traveled to the Duplain mansion within the Archduchy. Derrick was stunned by the grandeur of the estate. Before entering, the client formally introduced himself as Delon, the head butler of the Duplain estate, apologizing for concealing his identity due to the nature of the task. The woman beside him introduced herself as Katharina, the head maid of the Archduke's mansion. Jaden formally introduced himself as the leader of the Beldun mercenaries. Derrick realized that the supposed dispatcher and scullery maid were, in fact, top officials of the estate. The young woman then removed her hood and revealed herself as Iselin Aliner Duplain, the eldest daughter of the House of Duplain. She formally appointed Derrick as the magic tutor for her younger sister, Diella. Derrick was left stunned at the thought of becoming a tutor for a noble lady. The next scene opens at the Grand Duchy of Duplain residence. Inside the mansion, the door to a room is thrown open violently as Rhaeg, the Duke's son, storms in. The Duke is seated inside the room, with Valerian beside him, engaged in conversation. Rhaeg loudly calls out to both Valerian and his father, demanding their involvement in an urgent matter. The Duke immediately reprimands Rhaeg for his rude and disrespectful behavior. Rhaeg responds that someone is behaving far worse than he is, pointing the blame at their youngest sister, Diella. At that moment, a maid is seen sitting on the floor, crying uncontrollably. Rhaeg begins complaining to the Duke about Diella, stating that she has gone too far and has even laid her hands on people he personally hired. The maid remains silent, continuing to cry without defending herself. Valerian steps in and tells Rhaeg to lower his voice in front of his father. Rhaeg ignores Valerian's warning and continues his complaints about Diella, stating that more than 10 servants quit just last month. He adds that she smashes objects whenever she feels like it. After saying this, Rhaeg moves closer to the Duke's desk and, in a raised voice, demands to know how long his father plans to keep turning a blind eye to what he calls a thug. Seeing Rhaeg's extreme rudeness, Valerian stands up from his seat and angrily shouts at him, ordering him to stop immediately. Rhaeg turns to look at Valerian, but disregards his words entirely. He continues pushing his opinion toward his father, stating that even if Diella is useless, they still have Azeline, and suggesting that it is time to let Diella go. The Duke removes his glasses and calmly, but firmly tells Rhaeg that this matter is not his decision to make, and that he should not concern himself with it further. Rhaeg refuses to back down, and explains that he already had the Grand Steward look into a monastery. He mentions that the facilities are good, and that many children of nobles come and go there. Rhaeg goes on to suggest that instead of living, while being treated like a burden, it would be better for Diella to devote herself to God's will. He adds that if leaving her would bring great trouble to the family, then it would be better too. Before he can finish his sentence, the Duke suddenly stands up, grabs Raig by the head and slams it forcefully onto the desk. After doing so, the Duke glares at Raig in fury and reiterates that this is not Raig's decision to make. Realizing that his will is not being followed, Raig becomes even angrier and shouts that when the time comes to decide, his father must make a decision. The Duke responds only with an intense, furious stare as the tension inside the room lingers. The scene smoothly shifts outside, where Derek and Azeline are walking toward the Duke's room. Azeline asks Derek whether he has heard anything about her youngest sister, Diella. Derek replies that he has seen Lady Diella listed in the Duplain family registry. Azeline agrees and adds that Diella is probably not well known to the public. As their conversation continues, Raig and Valerian exit the Duke's room. Upon seeing them, Azeline stops walking and calls out to them, bringing both storylines together at the same moment. After a long time apart, Valerian finally meets Azeline again and asks about her experience in Ebelstein. Azeline responds respectfully, saying that thanks to his care, she has been living comfortably. Hearing this, Valerian expresses his appreciation and tells her that they can talk more later, explaining that Raig has been badly injured and needs immediate treatment. Azeline understands the situation without complaint. Meanwhile, Derek closely observes Valerian and Raig, studying them carefully. His attention then shifts to the maid who is still crying nearby, and he silently takes note of her condition. The scene then cuts back to the Duke's room. Azeline and Derek are now seated in front of the Duke. The Duke tells Azeline that he is relieved to hear she has been doing well in Ebelstein. Azeline replies that it is all thanks to him. She then introduces Derek, explaining that he is the magic tutor she brought from Ebelstein and that he has agreed to take responsibility for Diella. The Duke looks at Derek, mindful of her father's busy schedule. Azeline does not continue the conversation and politely takes her leave, telling him to take care. Derek also shows his respect by bowing to the Duke. Both of them begin to leave, but the Duke suddenly calls Derek to stop. Azeline exits the room, leaving Derek behind. The Duke continues writing something on a piece of paper while observing Derek, who appears quite young. Derek does not deny this impression. The Duke then asks whether Derek can handle magic to some extent. Derek answers that he can use a small amount of one-star magic. Hearing this, the Duke laughs, then realizes that Derek has no reason to lie. He remarks that humility does not always come across as a sign of virtue. Derek listens silently without responding, then looks at the Duke and thinks to himself that humility will not work on a 5-star mage like Grand Duke Duplain. Derek then apologizes, saying that he did not intend to come off as disrespectful. The Duke replies that it is fine and says he understands why Derek carries himself that way, noting that being too talented can sometimes eat away at a person. He adds that judging by Derek's age and attire, he does not look suited to be a magic tutor. Derek explains that he is a mercenary. The Duke responds that since Azeline chose him, he will not pry any further. He grants Derek entry to the annex of the residence where Diella lives and instructs him to have a maid guide him. He then tells Derek that he may go. At that moment, Derek asks if he may ask one question. The Duke agrees. Derek explains that he is a mercenary and that once he accepts a commission, it is his duty to see it through. He states that Azeline commissioned him so that Lady Diella may learn magic and enter high society as a proper noble. The Duke questions why Derek is spelling out something so obvious. Derek replies that it is because he has an earnest request to make. This answer leaves the Duke visibly confused. The scene briefly cuts to Diella, who is shown violently throwing a plate at a maid. The plate narrowly misses, and if it had hit, the maid would have been seriously injured. The maid becomes terrified, yet still apologizes repeatedly for her mistakes. Diella coldly asks whether the maid truly believes that apologizing will change anything given her status. The maid is unable to respond, and Diella angrily orders her to get out of her sight immediately, threatening to throw the plate at her face if she appears again. The maid is shown shaking in fear. The scene then shifts to Azeline and Jaden. Jaden asks why she chose Derek specifically, pointing out that magic tutors should have been lining up at Duplain, and that a commoner would struggle to work as a noble's magic tutor. Azeline replies that she tried almost every famous magic master on the continent, but all of them eventually gave up. She explains that she decided to choose those who can use magic, but are living under desperate circumstances. She adds that although Derek has the background of a mercenary, he seemed to understand how nobles conduct themselves and was familiar with noble culture. Hearing Azeline's explanation, Jaden smiles and remarks that Derek's master was a fallen noble who had once been quite successful, adding that Derek must have learned many things from him. Azaline responds thoughtfully, saying that this makes sense. She explains that she found Derek refined and kind despite his life as a mercenary, and that she believed he might be able to gently rein Diella in and guide her. Jaden laughs at her words and tells her that she needs to learn how to see through people better. Azaline becomes slightly confused by this remark. Jaden then explains that Derek is a mage who grew up on the streets and worked as a mercenary even before coming of age. He adds that someone raised on the streets cannot survive on refinement and kindness alone. Azaline looks at Jaden in surprise, but does not offer any reply. Elsewhere, a dispatch officer and a maid escort Derek toward Diella's room. After reaching the door, Derek knocks, but there is no response from inside. Seeing this, he opens the door himself and greets the person inside. He notices Diella sitting there and, while facing her from behind, introduces himself and asks to be excused for a moment. Diella, the second daughter of Duke Duplain, allows him to enter. Derek quietly steps into the room, and Diella smiles as she watches him. Without warning, she suddenly throws a bucket of filthy water over Derek. Derek remains silent and does not say a word to her. Having done this, Diella bursts into laughter and begins mocking him openly, insulting him without restraint. With overwhelming arrogance, she asks whether he is the mercenary the Grand Steward mentioned, then looks at him again and compares him to a sewer rat. Derek continues to stand there quietly, offering no response. Diella then climbs onto a chair and throws more dirty water onto him, telling him that she specially prepared all of this just for him to give him a warm welcome. She adds that being drenched in gutter water suits him far better. Derek endures everything in silence, bearing the humiliation without resistance. Diella soon runs out of filthy water, leaving her slightly disappointed, as she wanted to mock Derek even more. Derek remains standing silently and looks directly at her, seeing him raise his eyes toward her like that fills Diella with rage. She kicks Derek hard and berates Shone as anger for daring to look at her in that manner. The force of the kick sends Derek falling to the floor. Even then, Derek shows no reaction. Enraged by his lack of response, Diella removes her shoe. She insults him by calling him filthy and throws the shoe at him. After that, she returns to her seat and, with overwhelming arrogance, tells Derek to stay in his place. She kicks him again with her leg and mocks the idea that someone as low class as him could ever teach her. She declares that someone like him should never have dared to come near her in the first place. The scene then shifts to the Duke's room. The Duke stands by the window, staring outside, while recalling Derek's words from their earlier conversation. Derek had stated that the very fact he was there meant Lady Diella's problem could not be easily resolved. He had asked how much authority the Duke, who loved Diella more than anyone else, was willing to grant him when it came to teaching her. As this memory fades, the scene returns to the present. Derek suddenly slaps Diella with great force. The impact sends her crashing onto the floor. She stares at Derek in shock, unable to believe that someone dared to strike her. Until that moment, no one had ever treated her in such a way. Derek looks down at Diella with an intense, furious gaze and harshly orders her to stand up. The scene shifted to 3 years earlier. During one of his conversations with Keisha, Derek asked how she would teach a stubborn student who refused to listen. Keisha replied that she would first try to understand such a student. Derek considered that answer too idealistic and pressed further, bringing up the case of a student for whom even understanding was impossible. Keisha explained that the essence of teaching was guiding a student toward a better path. She believed that communication through understanding and tolerance was always the first approach. However, if that failed, a different starting point was necessary. When Derek asked what that starting point would be, Keisha answered that fear must be engraved into the student. The memory faded, and the scene smoothly returned to the present. Derek struck Diella across the face and ordered her to treat others with consideration and respect. He made it clear that he would not repeat himself and demanded that she stand up. Diella rose to her feet, grinding her teeth in rage, and retaliated by slapping Derek back. She lashed out in anger, unable to believe that someone like him would dare lay a hand on her. Without hesitation, Derek struck her again. He reiterated that he would not say it twice, and emphasized that consideration and respect were mandatory when dealing with others. Diella responded with a mocking smirk and immediately called out for Delon, accusing Derek of assaulting a noble lady. Delon rushed in with several maids, panicked and alarmed, and urgently checked on Diella's condition. He confronted Derek furiously, demanding to know what he thought he was doing and warning him of the consequences if the Grand Duke were to learn of this incident. Derrick calmly presented an official letter. The document stated that His Grace, Grand Duke Duplain, had delegated all educational authority regarding Lady Diella entirely to Derrick. It clarified that any teaching method Derrick chose had already been permitted by the Grand Duke himself. Upon reading the letter, Delon visibly lost his composure. Seeing Delon's reaction, Diella herself was left in shock. As tension spread through the estate, the next scene revealed Raig's older brother storming toward Derrick's room in a rage. Raig tried desperately to stop him, but his brother refused to listen. He seized Derrick by the collar and accused him of daring to lay hands on Diella. Derrick responded calmly, stating that his actions were permitted by the Grand Duke. Raig intervened, reminding his brother that Derrick was a guest personally brought in by Iceland, and warning that such behavior could damage Iceland's standing. He added that their father had also approved Derrick's authority. Raig's brother ordered Derrick to follow him, and commanded Raig to stop interfering and return to his duties. As they left, Raig quietly reassured Derrick, explaining that he had heard the situation and believed Diella required a harsh lesson to regain her senses. He promised that his brother would not harm Derrick further. Derrick responded with a silent, steady stare. Derrick followed Raig's older brother through the corridors. Raig remained behind, sighing inwardly and wondering why the family continued clinging to a child with no hope. Raig's brother led Derrick into a neglected room filled with paintings and dolls. He explained that this had once been Diella's room when she still lived in the main house. The room had been left untouched and abandoned for a long time. He revealed that Diella had once enjoyed painting. She used to blush every time she asked him to look at her drawings, yet she never finished a single painting. Most of her canvases were left nearly blank. Overcome with emotion, he apologized to Derrick for his earlier outburst and asked him to accept the apology. Derrick reassured him that it was fine and asked why he had been brought to this room. He claimed that he simply enjoyed beating arrogant, stuck-up nobles. Terrified, Diella struggled to process his words. Derrick continued, stating that there was no reason for a low-born commoner to like nobles. He explained that the whole act of being a teacher was merely a pretext, a justification that allowed him to beat noble lords and ladies like her. He described how beautiful the screams of the high and mighty sounded to him. Diella, trembling, asked if he truly believed he would be safe after doing something like this. Derrick calmly drew his sword and assured her that he would be safe. He reminded her that she would soon be sent to a monastery anyway, and that no one would believe anything she said. Even if a major accident occurred, he could simply apologize with his life, as that was all a commoner's life was worth. He added that he could always run away and be forgotten, especially since it would appear as though he had removed a nuisance for the Duplain family. Overcome with fear, Diella stood up and began to run. In her mind, she believed she would die if she was caught. She knew that crossing the open fields toward the mansion would get her captured immediately. She jolted awake in fury, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. Derrick grabbed her hand and dragged her along without explanation. Diella screamed in outrage, demanding that he release her. She ordered the maids to stop him, but none of them dared to intervene. Derrick dragged Diella outside and threw her onto the open training field. Diella shouted that nothing would change through such actions, and demanded to know who he thought he was to dare teach her. Derrick calmly stated that since no one else was listening, he would share an interesting fact. With a cruel smirk, he admitted that he had no intention of teaching her magic at all. He expressed desperation, explaining that Diella was at risk of being sent to a monastery. If she could master even a single one-star magic spell, he believed he could somehow persuade their father to spare her. He begged Derrick to save Diella. As he examined the room further, Derrick noticed that Diella had not completely abandoned magic. Numerous notes were scattered throughout the books. Derrick observed that the books were theoretical texts from the School of Discipline. Raig's brother confirmed this, explaining that nobles typically learned magic through that school. Derrick decided that he would give it a try. The scene transitioned to early morning. Derrick abruptly woke Diella by splashing water onto her. At some point, she began obsessing excessively over her bloodline. Eventually, she was expelled from the main house and confined to the annex. He admitted that he could not understand what caused her to change so drastically. With visible sadness, Raig's brother explained that Diella had not always been someone deserving of such contempt. She decided to escape into the forest instead, confident in her familiarity with it. From there, she believed she could return safely to the mansion and ensure that the one who died would be Derrick, not her. As she ran, she glanced back and saw Derek forming a fireball to block her escape. She realized in shock that fireball was two-star magic and could not comprehend how someone like him could use it. Derek smirked and hurled the fireball toward her. Diella fell to the ground, narrowly avoiding the attack. The fireball missed her entirely. Derek looked down at her and smirked again, casually remarking that he had missed. Diella keeps running through the forest while Derek attacks her with a mana arrow. She narrowly dodges it and continues to flee without stopping. Derek observes her movements and acknowledges that they are quite impressive, finding it hard to believe that she is someone who stays cooped up in the annex all day. Diella briefly glances at him, but does not slow down and keeps running. As she runs, Diella thinks about how long she can keep going and whether escape is even possible. She realizes that at this rate, she will definitely be caught. Meanwhile, Derek places his hand on the ground and spreads his mana throughout the forest, carefully observing the surroundings. He thinks that this is exactly the forest he saw in the painting. He concludes that it must be a place where she played since she was young. Without even realizing it, she felt the mana within the vast nature and transferred that feeling onto her painting. He becomes certain that this place confirms his suspicions. At that moment, Diella attacks Derek from behind with a rock, aiming to strike him. Derek immediately blocks the attack with his sword. Diella grits her teeth in anger, frustrated by her failure. Derek praises her spirit and acknowledges that realizing she could not shake off the pursuit and choosing to counterattack was not an easy decision. Diella starts taking deep breaths as exhaustion overtakes her. Derek notes that she seems to have no energy left to run. He watches her breathing heavily and asks for her last words. Diella responds bitterly, mocking the idea that he might be afraid she would apologize. She tells him to just kill her and declares that, unlike lowborns, she does not act servile. Derek questions her obsession with bloodline. Diella clenches her teeth and asks what she has left if her noble bloodline is taken away. She shouts through tears about magic, screaming repeatedly as her emotions overflow. She insists that she has tried everything, that she has tried her hardest until the brink of death, yet nothing worked. She expresses despair over falling behind in magic and painting, and over failing at everything. She questions what remains for her besides her bloodline, and breaks down, wondering who she even is without it. After hearing everything, Derek raises his sword and prepares to end it, bidding her farewell. At that critical moment, when Diella opens her eyes, she sees that she has blocked Derek's attack with her own mana. Derek smiles and praises her efforts, asking forgiveness for his rudeness. He explains that although what she used was merely mana manifestation and could not yet be called true magic, she still did well. Diella then breaks down and cries loudly. Later, as Derek bandages her wounds, he explains that she belongs to the wild school. He mentions that most nobles usually learn the discipline school. He explains that while all schools are essentially the same, the process of mastering and learning them varies greatly. Because Lady Diella belongs to the wild school, but tried to learn magic through the theories of the discipline school, problems arose. He compares it to wearing clothes that do not fit, explaining that it is like trying to force her body into something she cannot fit into at all. Diella asks how he knew that she belonged to the wild school. Derek explains that he saw the painting she drew. He says that she felt the mana floating in nature and transferred it onto the canvas. He adds that most mages born with the temperament of the wild school tend to feel the mana existing within nature since childhood. He finishes tending to her wounds and says that it should be bearable for her to walk now. Diella remarks that it is not bad at that level. Derek responds by explaining that while she succeeded in mana manifestation, there is still a long way to go. He tells her that starting tomorrow, he will teach her how to naturally manifest mana. Diella thanks him sincerely. Derek then says that they should leave. As they walk, Derek compliments Diella's painting, continuing to praise her talent. The next morning arrives. Diella wakes up and begins practicing her mana, but it does not go well. Frustrated, she steps out of her room. At that moment, a maid accidentally spills water while cleaning. The maid immediately kneels down, bows deeply, and tearfully apologizes to Diella over and over again. Diella calmly tells her to be more careful and then walks away. The maid is left shocked, wondering why she was not hit and questioning what had happened to the lady. Other maids gather and ask the same maid if Lady Diella really did not hit her. They wonder what could have happened when the lady went out the previous evening. Diella then goes to Derek to learn mana. Hearing this, Delon is shocked. Derek closes the door right in front of Diella's face and tells her to come back in the afternoon. Delon cries tears of joy thinking that the lady has finally started to change. Suddenly, Diala reverts to her old behavior and begins kicking Derrick's door aggressively. She shouts angrily, demanding to know who he thinks he is to tell her when to come and go. She orders him to open the door immediately and teach her right now. Calling him a crazy bastard, inside, Derrick ignores the commotion entirely and calmly goes to sleep. The scene opens with two maids cleaning while quietly talking among themselves. One maid mentions hearing news and brings up the rumor that Lady Diala has not broken a single plate that day. The other maid confirms it, recalling that she accidentally splashed water near Lady Diala that morning. Yet Lady Diala did not even yell at her. The first maid then adds that she also heard Lady Diala finally manifested her mana. As their conversation continues, Raig passes by them. He suddenly stops, turns toward them, and demands to know what they just said. After some time passes, the scene shifts to the Duke reacting to the news, repeating in disbelief that Diala manifested her mana. Valerian confirms it, stating that he verified the information multiple times with both the head butler and the servants. The Duke responds that it is wonderful news. Raig, however, counters by saying it is far too early to get their hopes up over a simple mana manifestation. Valerian scolds Raig, pointing out that their sister finally made progress, and yet he cannot even offer a single compliment. Raig retorts by asking if Valerian has already forgotten the absolute havoc Diala has caused until now. He insists that it is far too soon to cancel her trip to the monastery over such a minor achievement. Hearing all of this, the Duke remains silent and does not say anything. The scene then shifts to Diala, who is sitting with her cheeks puffed out in frustration. Derrick notices her behavior and asks if she is sulking. Diala denies sulking and instead says she is angry. Derrick responds that acting like a brat will not change anything. Diala snaps back, insisting again that she is not a brat but angry. Derrick states that throwing a tantrum will not help and explains that everything has to happen in the right order. Diala yells at him, repeating that she is not throwing a tantrum but is angry. Derrick looks at her coldly, which makes Diala flinch slightly. She turns her face away and reluctantly agrees to call it a tantrum. Derrick then sits down on a chair and warns her that if she runs wild just because she manifested some mana, she will burn out quickly. He explains that he speaks from experience and emphasizes that rest is just as important as practice. He adds that now that she has had enough rest, it is time to get back to work. Diala responds dismissively, agreeing half-heartedly and sarcastically calling him a boring, old-fashioned magic professor. Derrick coldly suggests trying a less boring method instead. Hearing that, Diala panics and quickly says that she is fine as things are. Derrick then gathers mana energy in his hand and explains that today they will practice mana manifestation. He states that once she masters the flow, learning one-star spells will be easy. He explains that the Wild School lacks strict structure, making it ideal for self-teaching, and that it prioritizes freedom far more than the Orthodox school. He then honestly adds that this system fits her personality quite well. Diala questions what he means by that. Derrick clarifies that he means exactly what it sounds like, explaining that her free-spirited nature has great synergy with the Wild School. He further adds that, with the Duplain blood flowing through her veins, her talent is more than sufficient. Hearing this, Diala reacts in surprise and asks if she really has talent. Derrick confirms it, stating that the fact she managed to manifest an ice wall on her first try proves she is talented. Diala excitedly wonders if that makes her a genius. Derrick immediately corrects her, saying there is a big difference between being talented and being a genius. Diala insists that they are basically the same, but Derrick firmly denies it. As their argument continues, the perspective shifts outside, revealing Raig standing nearby, listening to their conversation with visible anger. The scene transitions to the next day, where Diala approaches Derrick and explains that she can manifest mana but cannot control its direction. The following day, she returns again and shows him her attempt to infuse the mana with frost, admitting that it feels strange. On yet another day, she comes back saying she can feel the mana, but the sensation feels completely off. Later that evening, Derrick is seen sitting near a tree while reading a book. Diala storms toward him, yelling angrily and demanding to know what he is doing there. She reminds him that she told him to stay near the annex and accuses him of slacking off, questioning whether her father lent him the magic book for that reason. Derrick calmly responds that this is exactly why the book was lent to him. Diala grabs Derrick by the hand and drags him along, announcing that she finally succeeded. She excitedly explains that she managed to let the mana flow just as he instructed and urges him to hurry and take a look. The scene then shifts indoors, where Valerian is waiting for Derek. Derek enters and asks if he was summoned. Valerian tells him to sit and says they should talk. After sitting down, Valerian asks how Diella has been lately. Derek reports that she has made significant progress, though it will still take time before she can master a one-star spell. Valerian acknowledges this and mentions that his mother, who has been away at a social gathering, will likely return by next week. He warns Derek that she is not someone to be taken lightly. He adds that while the people currently in the mansion are fine, nobles in general are not pleased with commoners holding important positions, and notes that Derek understands this better than anyone. Derek says he will keep that in mind and asks if that is all Valerian wanted to say. Valerian then declares that he is the next head of the Duplain family. He reflects on what it means to be a patriarch, explaining that it involves embracing and protecting every member of the family. He states that doing so requires sincerity with everyone, yet admits how difficult that task is. He muses about how deep and complex the human heart is, and how wonderful it would be if everyone's thoughts and values aligned, but acknowledges that reality is never so simple. Derek asks what Valerian's point is. Valerian suddenly becomes dramatic and emotionally claims that Diella no longer plays with him. This statement leaves Derek completely stunned. Valerian continues his dramatic display, recalling how vividly he remembers Diella smiling and welcoming him when they were children. He describes her as a perfect angel and wonders aloud if there is some way to win back Diella's favor. Derek asks why Valerian is asking him this. Valerian answers that it is because Diella only follows Derek around now. At the same time, the scene cuts to Diella elsewhere, searching for Derek. Valerian then dismisses the topic and excitedly shows Derek something else. He explains that he had a maid teach him how to make dolls and proudly asks for Derek's opinion, claiming it looks exactly like Diella. He insists that the doll is filled with brotherly love. Derek bluntly asks if he is trying to curse someone. Valerian responds by calling Derek completely useless when it comes to things like this. Sometime later, a new scene begins where a lady approaches Derek and says she has heard a lot about him, mentioning that the family managed to hire a very capable magic tutor and expressing her pleasure at meeting him. She introduces herself as Miriella Dable Duplain and says that she would like to send a gift to Derek's home territory if he does not mind. Derek responds by explaining that he does not belong to any specific house or territory and that he is a commoner. Hearing this, the lady is visibly shocked. 1 week earlier, a lavish carriage stood parked before the towering gates of a powerful noble estate. Its polished exterior reflected the wealth and authority of the family that ruled over the land. Inside the grounds, the young noblewoman Aselin finished her business and prepared to depart, satisfied with the decision she had made. Before leaving, she entrusted the estate of Dala to the care of a white-haired mercenary named Derek, explaining that urgent matters required her immediate return to Everstein. Derek accepted the responsibility without hesitation, showing no resistance or complaint, as if such orders were nothing new to him. His calm obedience amused the guild leader, who soon appeared laughing as he clapped a hand on Derek's shoulder, joking about his predictable response. Moments later, the guild leader joined Aselin inside the carriage and casually reminded Derek to complete his assignment swiftly, preferably before any unexpected trouble arrived. With that, the carriage rolled away, leaving Derek alone within the vast and intimidating noble estate, now responsible for navigating a deeply complicated household. As the carriage disappeared from view, Aselin suddenly froze, realizing she had forgotten to relay a critical warning. Panic crossed her face as she remembered one crucial detail she had failed to mention. She quickly explained that the family's matriarch would be returning within the week, and that Derek should be cautious. When asked whether such concern was truly necessary, she described her mother as a living embodiment of terror, someone no one wished to confront unprepared. Inside the mansion, tension simmered beneath the ornate ceiling of the grand office. The matriarch, Mela, erupted in fury upon learning that a common mercenary had been appointed as the youngest daughter's instructor. Her outrage echoed through the room as she demanded how such an unthinkable decision had been allowed. The patriarch, calm and composed, attempted to quiet her while continuing his work, but her anger only intensified. She declared that the youngest blonde girl was the most precious treasure of their entire bloodline and could not be entrusted to someone of such low origin. Eventually, the Grand Duke removed his glasses and admitted that he shared some of her concerns. He acknowledged that even noble tutors had abandoned the task, but explained that Derrick's appointment had been a direct recommendation from their daughter Aselin. The matriarch paced the room relentlessly, insisting there should be a minimum standard for anyone educating a child of their lineage. She proposed replacing Derrick with her own brother, Flam, now that the girl had finally begun to manifest magical energy. The patriarch questioned whether pulling a border commander into private tutoring was reasonable, but she dismissed his objections, claiming Everstein's high society was a far more dangerous battlefield. Her fear centered on the upcoming debut and ball, where she refused to allow her daughter to be ridiculed for having an unknown instructor. Before the argument could escalate further, the office doors opened and their eldest son, Valerian, entered. He urged his mother to calm herself, reminding her that she had not come merely to argue. His attempt failed. Mela ordered him aside and insisted the issue was far too serious to ignore. Their second son, Rig, then spoke up, questioning whether the true concern was not the instructor's status, but whether Derrick possessed the talent required to teach Dila. As he paced the room, he acknowledged that while a commoner tutor was unusual, skill alone would be enough to justify the choice. Rig proposed personally testing Derrick through a magic duel, but the patriarch dismissed the idea, stating with certainty that Derrick was undeniably powerful. This unexpected praise stunned Rig into silence. After a brief pause, he shifted focus, suggesting instead that Dila herself be tested. If her instructor were truly capable, her progress should already be evident. The patriarch considered the proposal carefully. Soon after, Rig exited the room, ignoring Valerian's attempt to stop him. Valerian questioned his brother's intentions, especially the cruelty of challenging an inexperienced child. Rig responded coldly, expressing disbelief that Dila had truly changed from her troubled past. Valerian insisted that she was still their sister and deserved protection as family. Rig scoffed at the idea of blood ties, openly revealing his resentment. He claimed that Dila's existence threatened the family's reputation, and that she should remain hidden away from the world. Valerian watched him leave, disturbed by the bitterness behind those words, while unease settled heavily over the mansion. As dawn broke the next morning, a bird perched quietly outside the estate, signaling the start of a new day. Without warning, Dila burst into Derrick's room in a storm of anger. She threw an official scroll onto his book, forcing his attention, and revealed the ultimatum written within. If she lost the upcoming magic duel, Derrick would be dismissed immediately. Derrick responded with complete indifference. He acknowledged that her opponent was an experienced one-star mage, and admitted the fight would be difficult. His lack of concern infuriated Dila, who demanded he take the situation seriously. Derrick simply stated that he only performed the duties he was paid for, and had already received sufficient compensation. His response left Dila stunned and shaken. A week later, the Grand Duchy's flag waved fiercely as the long-awaited duel day arrived. The training courtyard was prepared, and nobles and servants gathered in anticipation. The patriarch arrived with commanding presence, accompanied by his still irritated wife. Derrick greeted them respectfully, maintaining an unshakable composure even under their scrutiny. The patriarch studied Derrick closely, sensing hidden confidence beneath his calm. Soon after, heavy footsteps announced the arrival of the challenger. Rig stepped onto the battlefield with lethal intent, his presence radiating hostility. He made it clear that this would not be a simple duel, and intended to utterly crush his sister. Dila stepped forward, wearing her red hood, her expression focused despite the crushing pressure. She questioned Derrick's indifference one last time, and he explained that her mana had stabilized and her potential was finally awakening. He reminded her that noble blood flowed through her veins, and that true mastery came through self-discovery rather than constant instruction. Though confused and frustrated, Dila finally admitted her weaknesses and expressed genuine determination. She confessed her desire to continue learning under Derrick and rejected the idea of any replacement. For a brief moment, Derrick silently observed her resolve. Then, for the first time, he prepared to intervene. He acknowledged his lack of experience in noble duels, but promised to teach her how to win a real fight, if she truly sought victory. All her life, Dila had been mocked. People whispered that she lacked talent, that even renowned tutors had abandoned her, that the Duplain lineage was fading, and that her birth itself had been a mistake. Yet now, standing beneath the morning sun, her eyes burned with fierce resolve. She stepped onto the battlefield, not as a noble daughter, not as a sister, but as Derrick's disciple, a mage determined to claim her place in the world. The battlefield fell into silence as Diella stood at the sparring ground, tense but composed. The butler announced the noble high-rank sparring rules. Victory would go to whoever forced activation of General Salem's protective magic circle first. The match began. Diella met Rage's gaze across the arena, sensing a sharp, dangerous intent behind his controlled expression. At the signal, a pendant activated at the platform's edge, projecting a shimmering field that formed the phantom protective circle, designed to prevent lethal damage and suppress fatal spells. From the sidelines, Derrick observed the setup with a cold assessment of noble extravagance, noting how easily wealth replaced practical combat concerns. The spar was timed for 10 minutes, though he already expected it to end far sooner once Rage committed. Rage immediately escalated. Dense purple mana gathered in his hand as he began casting, compressing into unstable, violent energy that distorted the air. Without hesitation, he launched forward, unleashing a sharp blast of condensed force. Diella narrowly evaded the first strike, the attack grazing past and detonating behind her. Rage pressed on relentlessly, chaining attacks to overwhelm her movement. Diella maintained distance, focusing on precise reactions rather than panic. Derrick analyzed her form, noting she could handle basic one-tier magic but lacked refinement, wasting mana by brute-forcing control instead of guiding it efficiently. Meanwhile, Rage intensified his assault, convinced her defense would break quickly. Their collision escalated as Rage's strikes hammered her barrier, sending vibrations through her arms, while cracks began forming under sustained pressure. He dismissed her defense as crude mana manipulation and prepared a concentrated burst of higher output. At that moment, Diella's memory of Derrick's harsh training resurfaced, reminding her that real combat was not about fairness but victory. The recollection steadied her. She shifted her mindset, abandoning defensive hesitation and adopting mercenary-style tactics focused on control. Timing and opportunity, her movement changed abruptly. Instead of retreating, she lowered herself and used terrain and positioning to disrupt Rage's rhythm, forcing openings while conserving energy. Her barrier, however, continued to weaken under repeated impacts. Rage declared the engagement nearing its end and launched a powerful finishing strike. An explosion erupted across the platform, engulfing the area in dust and debris. The audience reacted in shock as visibility vanished. Derrick remained still, watching without reaction. Diella's mother panicked, believing her daughter had been struck, while the Duke remained focused, noting that the protective circle had not activated. He inferred something unconventional had occurred. Within the smoke, Rage realized the circle had not triggered, and that Diella was missing from the expected position. Confused, he scanned the battlefield as new attacks suddenly erupted from beneath the platform itself. Diella had repositioned underground, using the structure as cover to launch surprise attacks from below. Rage barely evaded each strike, growing increasingly strained as he struggled to locate her exact position. As he hesitated over whether such movement violated sparring rules, more attacks forced him back. He finally spotted her emergence from the ground, now visibly transformed in demeanor, her expression sharpened by resolve rather than restraint. Rage recognized a familiar intensity in her fighting spirit and connected it to Derrick's influence. Realizing the strategy had been deliberately shaped, frustration and understanding collided as he shed his composure, removing his coat and fully shifting into serious combat mode, prepared to engage on her terms. The strike from below caught Rig off guard more than he expected. The impact lingered, not just as pain but as a shift in his focus, sharpening his instincts rather than shaking them. Above, Diella's mother leaned forward, alarmed after noticing movement beneath the platform. Realizing Diella had slipped below, she called for the match to stop. The Duke remained composed, pointing out no rules had been broken, his attention fixed on the unfolding fight with growing curiosity. Hidden beneath the platform, Diella stayed still within the dust-filled space. Her breathing remained controlled as her senses extended outward. She felt the flow of mana like threads in the air, tracking every movement above. With precise intent, she disrupted Rig's casting whenever he began an incantation. Above ground, Rig attempted to gather mana, but ice formed beneath his feet without warning, forcing him to retreat. He quickly realized her strategy. She was targeting him the moment he tried to cast. If it continued, he would lose control of the fight. His eyes shifted to the central pole, bearing the arena's flag, and a plan formed. Below, Diella sensed the sudden halt in mana flow. He had stopped casting, which meant he was preparing something else. She focused, ready to strike the instant he resumed. Instead, Rig climbed the pole, gaining height until the distance weakened her sensing ability. From above, he abandoned incantations and condensed mana directly in his hand. Blue energy gathered silently, dense and controlled. His aim was clear: destroy the entire platform. He released the attack. A glowing arrow slammed into the base of the pole. Splitting it apart, the structure trembled before collapsing. Rig leapt away as the platform shattered, sending a massive cloud of dust into the air. From the sidelines, Derrick watched calmly as panic spread among the spectators. Within the dust, Rig landed hard, coughing as he searched for his opponent. Through the haze, he spotted Diella nearby, both of them partially blinded by the debris. He reacted instantly, forming another mana arrow and firing through the dust. At the last moment, Diella sensed the attack and tried to respond, but her control slipped. The energy grazed her forehead, drawing blood as she barely avoided a direct hit. Rig pressed forward, preparing another strike, confident in his advantage at close range. Before he could finish, Diella suddenly appeared at his blind spot and drove a powerful kick into his chest. The impact forced the air from his lungs, dropping him to his knees. She followed without hesitation, throwing dust directly into his eyes to blind him further. As he struggled to recover, she retreated onto the broken ground, creating space despite her dwindling strength. When Rig cleared his vision, disbelief crossed his face. She had resorted to anything available: strikes, sand, movement, continuing to fight despite nearly exhausting her mana. Slowly, he rose again, recognizing her resolve and meeting it with his own. Under the harsh afternoon sun, the ruined arena stood silent for a moment. Blood ran down Diella's face as she pressed her hand to her forehead, her vision briefly blurring. Then Derrick's teachings resurfaced in her mind: mana as paint, spellcasting as the brush. She steadied herself, shifting her focus away from pain and fear. Instead, she concentrated on the flow of mana around her. Gradually, it responded, wrapping around her like a thin shield. She gathered what little remained, shaping it with intent. A glowing magic circle spread beneath her feet. From it, an ice spear formed, sharp and solid. The spectators reacted in shock as she reached the level of one-star magic. Across from her, Rig sensed the shift and formed multiple mana arrows in response. He still believed he held the advantage if he struck first. They moved at the same instant. Diella launched the ice spear forward, while Rig released a barrage of arrows. The attacks collided midair, triggering a massive explosion that tore across the battlefield. Energy surged outward in a violent wave. Crackling as it expanded, the shockwave reached the spectators, leaving them stunned as dust once again engulfed the arena. When the haze began to settle, Rig stood breathing heavily, drained but steady. Opposite him, Diella remained standing as well, equally exhausted. Nearby, Derrick watched in silence, his gaze fixed on the outcome of the clash. A year earlier, 3 small birds perched on a thin branch outside the Duplain castle, chirping as their mother fed them. Their soft, lively sounds brushed against the cold stone walls, a fragile contrast to the weight the castle carried within. Inside, the Duke walked through the corridor while his butler followed, speaking about a formal invitation that had arrived that morning. The words were proper and measured, filled with duty, yet the Duke paid no attention. His focus had shifted to a half-open door. Inside, Diella sat alone, her small frame slumped, her expression drained. The sight struck him more deeply than any report. The moment gave way to the training grounds from that same day. Diella stood beneath the open sky, exhausted, her mana nearly depleted. Across from her, Rig remained seated as the faintly glowing barrier between them signaled the end of the match. She had lost. The weight of defeat settled heavily on her as she stared upward, searching for something in the empty sky. Nearby, her teacher stood in silence, his lowered posture speaking clearly enough. He had trusted her, trained her, yet the result remained unchanged. Her vision blurred and her composure broke. Tears fell freely, her cries raw and unrestrained, far removed from the restraint expected of nobility. It was the voice of someone who had given everything and still failed. From a distance, the Duke watched without expression. Beside him, the Duchess erupted in anger, condemning the harshness of the match and questioning how such brutality could be allowed. Her outrage filled the space, but the Duke did not respond. His attention remained fixed on Diella. As her sobs gradually softened, though never fully stopped, the Duke's thoughts drifted to the past. He recalled a young knight standing proudly before the king, introducing himself as Raymond Oswald Duplain, his voice strong with ambition and honor. The same fire he had once seen there now flickered faintly within Diella. Returning to the present, he studied her tear-streaked face. Beneath the visible despair, something sharper had taken root. Pain had shaped her in a way comfort never could. Eventually, her crying quieted. Two maids rushed forward in alarm, reaching for her, urging treatment. Without meeting their eyes, Diella pushed one hand aside. Firm but controlled, she rejected comfort and instead walked toward Rig. Rig stood uncertainly as she approached. He struggled to respond, offering a brief acknowledgement of her effort. She lowered her head in return, accepting the outcome without excuse, then turned away. The maids followed again, but she ignored them, continuing forward alone. Each step carried weight, yet remained steady. When she reached her teacher, she stopped. For a moment, she held herself together before tears returned. Quieter this time, she admitted only that she had lost and that she was sorry. Her teacher stepped forward and gripped her shoulders firmly. His words carried no pity, only certainty. Defeat was not an end, frustration was not shame, but something to be used, something that could push her further. Those words struck deeply. The restraint she rebuilt shattered again, and her cry rose louder than before. A maid hesitated nearby, unsure whether to intervene. But the Duchess rushed forward first. She dropped to her knees, ignoring everything else, and held Diella's face, overwhelmed with emotion. She wiped away tears, speaking as if Diella were still a child, pulling her into a tight embrace and urging rest and treatment. Diella's tears welled again, but this time she forced them back. She straightened herself, refusing to break down further in front of everyone. Surrounded by attendants, she finally allowed herself to be led away. The Duchess remained behind, kneeling for a moment longer before her composure collapsed. She covered her mouth and wept quietly. Nearby, the teacher turned to leave, but movement stopped him. The Duchess rose and struck him before he could react. Her anger poured out as she accused him of corrupting something pure, condemning his methods as disgraceful and unfit for a noble. He did not resist or defend himself. He endured in silence as she continued, even as another blow followed. At last, the Duke stepped between them. When the Duchess turned toward him for support, his response came without warning, a sharp strike that silenced the courtyard. He questioned her behavior calmly, asking who among them had truly acted without dignity. Though she protested, reminding him of the teacher's low status, he did not deny it. The man was a commoner, but he was also their daughter's teacher, and such treatment was unacceptable. The teacher remained still, offering no complaint. The Duke then stepped forward and bowed his head, apologizing on behalf of his wife. He spoke of differing ways of loving a child. The teacher accepted it simply, without elaboration. The Duke straightened and requested a private discussion. He led the teacher back into the castle, their footsteps echoing through the halls, while the Duchess watched in silence, her anger still burning. Inside the study, the Duke sat at his desk, pen in hand. Documents lay prepared before him. He stated calmly that Diella had been raised well and deserved recognition. As head of the estate, he intended to grant a fitting reward. He began writing, then paused, looking up with a direct question, whether the teacher desired access to 3-star magic. For a brief moment, surprise crossed the teacher's face before settling into resolve. His gaze met the Duke's steadily. The Duke observed him closely, recognizing something far beyond an ordinary instructor. This was a man of ambition and capability, someone who understood opportunity when it appeared. The offer stood before him, the teacher accepted. The conversation continued inside the Duke's study, where the atmosphere remained calm and controlled. The Duke began by acknowledging that the teacher had successfully guided Diella to the level of 1-star magic. However, in Ebelstein's high society, that level alone would never be enough. His tone stayed even but firm. The teacher listened without interruption, maintaining a steady posture. When he replied, he reasoned that the Duplain estate already had many capable instructors. Now that Diella had grasped the essence of magic, her growth would naturally accelerate. The Duke immediately dismissed that idea. What his daughter required was not someone who merely passed down techniques, but a true teacher. The distinction carried weight. He folded his hands and looked directly at the man, pointing out that, as a commoner, he was holding ambitions far beyond what his status allowed. The teacher remained silent. He understood that the Duke had already seen through him. His goal extended beyond 3-star magic, reaching toward even greater heights. That awareness made the Duke's presence far more imposing. Continuing to write, the Duke stated that someone with such ambition could not remain in a place like this forever. He asked if the teacher had already planned to leave. The answer came simply, yes, even so. The Duke insisted he continue teaching Diella for a while longer. Then he brought up the highest level a commoner could attain and asked directly if the teacher desired access to 3-star magic. There was no hesitation. The teacher accepted. Later, inside the estate library, the teacher stood among towering shelves filled with rare spellbooks. As he flipped through one, the sheer scale of knowledge became clear. While most spent their lives chasing even a single 2-star spellbook, this place held entire collections of 3-star magic. It was more than enough reason to stay longer than planned. A passing thought of Pellen crossed his mind. She would certainly cause chaos if she knew. The next morning, under a bright sky, Diella approached him. Her expression carried a mix of pride and slight embarrassment as she announced that she had become a 1-star mage. The teacher, still reading, responded calmly that using 1-star magic even once was enough to claim the title. Her pride rose briefly, but faded when she noticed his lack of enthusiasm. She pressed him for a reaction, only to hear that it was not an achievement she had earned alone. Though slightly frustrated, she admitted the process had not been easy. He observed that she seemed to have recovered well over the past few days, recalling how she had cried intensely before. Her face flushed immediately as she denied it, blaming dust instead. Then, with a hint of irritation, she mentioned that she had thought he would be dismissed. He brushed it aside and suggested continuing the lesson. Her growth was unusually fast, and she would soon learn additional 1-star spells. That caught her interest instantly. She began listing possibilities: magic arrow, wind blade, ice spear, her excitement building as she imagined mastering them all. He stopped her. The next step would be practicing magic manifestation. Her enthusiasm collapsed at once. She questioned why they were not moving on to new spells, but he explained that fundamentals mattered most. In the end, everything came down to mana. Reluctantly, she agreed, though her disappointment was obvious. He noticed the sudden shift in her mood, but did not dwell on it. The foundation would not change. As she glanced back at him, she realized he was watching her closely. When she asked why, he remarked that it was surprising to see her follow instructions so obediently. A faint blush spread across her face as she protested, claiming she had always respected his guidance. He reminded her calmly of their first meeting, when she had thrown dirty water on him twice. The memory struck her pride, leaving her visibly embarrassed. Trying to recover, she forced a bright tone, commenting on the pleasant weather and insisting they should begin practice quickly. He understood the deflection but allowed it, continuing the lesson without comment. By nightfall, the castle rested under silver moonlight. Diella lay on the training ground, exhausted from hours of practice. Her breathing heavy, the teacher remained standing. Unchanged, he mentioned casually that she would soon become busier. Sitting up, she admitted that her schedule would soon include etiquette and general education classes. Her tone carried uncertainty. When he pointed out that this was expected for someone who had reached 1-star magic, she looked away and listed the subjects: etiquette, languages, geography, history, botany, piano, sewing, questioning why all of it was necessary. She wondered how Isoline had endured such demands. He answered simply that this was why Isoline was known as the pride of Duplain. Diella lowered her voice, admitting she only wanted to focus on magic. He told her to do exactly that. Since he had been hired by the Duke, they still had freedom. She hesitated, unsure if that freedom would last, mentioning her mother's likely opposition. He asked calmly if there was anyone who could remove him now. She acknowledged that her father supported him, but her mother would not accept it easily. When she explained her mother's concerns about losing noble dignity, he dismissed it as insignificant. Silencing that opposition, he said, only required removing its justification. The meaning did not fully register with her. The following morning, the Duchess sat alone. Troubled, her thoughts spiraled into exaggerated fears, imagining Diella being led down reckless paths, behaving like a mercenary, disrupting high society in absurd ways. The images left her frustrated. Determined, she stepped outside, resolved to remove the teacher despite her husband's approval. There she encountered Diella. For a brief moment, she remembered the younger child who used to run into her arms. Emotion welled up, but the girl before her now stood composed and refined. Diella greeted her politely, apologizing for not being able to meet sooner due to recovery and a busy schedule. The Duchess, caught off guard by her maturity, could only listen. Diella spoke of upcoming lessons and expressed anticipation. Her tone calm and proper, though unsettled. The Duchess felt a quiet sense of satisfaction and urged her not to be late. As Diella walked away, a maid nearby dropped a bundle of wood. She paused, approached, and gently asked if the maid was hurt. advising her not to overexert herself. The simple kindness left the maid stunned. Without further attention, Diella continued on her path, posture straight and steps measured, leaving behind a silence filled with quiet surprise. Later that day, the setting shifted to the noble district of Ebelstein. In a quiet castle garden, an angel statue stood at its center, while two young ladies sat at a round table for tea. Elance spoke first, recalling how recent gatherings at Roja Salon had been lively and full of laughter. Still, during the last meeting, Iseline had seemed troubled. She had noticed it clearly and had been concerned. Iseline blinked in mild surprise, then admitted calmly that she had indeed been worried at the time. However, most of that concern had already been resolved, and she now felt at ease. Relief crossed Elance's face, though another matter lingered in her thoughts. She carefully brought up a rumor that Iseline had personally left the noble district to help someone. For a noble lady, such an action was unusual enough to cause worry. Iseline thanked her gently and explained that it had been for Diella. Finding a suitable magic teacher had not been simple, so she had gone herself. The explanation sounded simple, but Elance immediately understood the implication. For someone like Iseline to personally seek a teacher, that individual had to be exceptional. Denise, who had been listening quietly, joined in with a polite smile, confirming the teacher was indeed for Diella. Iseline nodded and added that she had recently visited the mansion. The change in Diella had been remarkable. She had become refined, composed, and had even manifested one-star magic. There was quiet pride in her voice as she spoke, seeing that progress had pushed even Iseline to work harder herself. Denise maintained her smile, though doubt flickered beneath it. The family had always kept Diella hidden. Speaking so openly now felt unusual. Still, she simply remarked that the teacher must be impressive. Iseline agreed without hesitation. Though he held no noble title, his ability was exceptional. It had been worth traveling all the way to the Beldun mercenary corps to find him. That single detail shifted the mood. A mercenary. Elance's thoughts drifted to old rumors of Diella's past behavior, wild and difficult. Yet now she had become disciplined and refined. Changing someone so completely required more than ordinary skill. She hid her thoughts behind a calm expression, but reached a quiet conclusion. If Diella continued to grow, her teacher's name would soon spread across noble society. It would be better to know it early. With a warm smile, she asked for his name. Iseline answered simply, Derrick. The scene shifted to a sitting chamber within the mansion, where Diella sat beside her mother. She spoke with enthusiasm, explaining how Derrick had even been teaching her etiquette, something she had struggled to learn alone. Her mother responded with a composed smile, praising her effort. But when Diella clarified that most of her progress came from Derrick's guidance, irritation quietly surfaced beneath that calm exterior. The conversation continued, and Diella spoke lightly about how difficult everything had been without his help. Each mention of his name deepened her mother's frustration, though none of it showed on her face. Once the conversation ended, she excused herself with dignity, concealing the anger beneath. Moving through the mansion, she began gathering information. She questioned a maid, who spoke warmly of Diella's recent kindness and gentler nature. A gardener shared a similar view, noting her improved mood and demeanor. Finally, the butler offered a thoughtful observation. Diella now carried a refinement he had previously only seen in Iseline. It seemed she was becoming a true noble lady. Instead of easing her concerns, these answers only intensified the Duchess's inner anger. She withdrew quietly, her thoughts burning beneath her composed expression. That night, under faint moonlight, Derrick trained alone outside. Sweat dripped from him as he pushed himself, refining his control over mana. Blue energy flickered around his hands, but the strain eventually forced him to collapse. As he caught his breath, he sensed someone nearby. Rig stood there. After a brief exchange, Rig joined him, explaining he wanted to talk about Diella. Noticing the book in Derrick's hand, he asked about it and was surprised to learn it was a 3-star spellbook lent by the Duke. Though it was beyond his current level, Derrick explained there was no harm in studying ahead. Returning to the main topic, Rig hesitated before awkwardly asking what girls their age liked. His uncertainty became clear as he nervously suggested making something for Diella. Derrick immediately dismissed the idea, imagining the result and rejecting it outright. The tension broke slightly, and Rig moved on, suggesting they head back. As they walked, he expressed gratitude. The atmosphere within the household had improved, and even their father seemed quietly satisfied. After a pause, Rig admitted that Diella had changed, and that perhaps he needed to change as well. He thanked Derek sincerely for that. Derek gave no verbal response, but continued walking beside him. When Rig mentioned that Diella's magic felt different, like drawing a picture, Derek acknowledged it. He explained that her mana control followed a unique style, one that would eventually allow her to grow independently. Rig understood her time would come. 2 months passed, and the atmosphere in the mansion grew lighter. Diella now sat at her dressing table, flowers arranged before her. She lifted one, smiling at its fragrance, reflecting on how much had changed. She could now use one-star magic comfortably, and had grown closer to those around her. She quietly admitted that much of this change was thanks to Derek. The maid, noticing her happiness, teased her about it, smiling. Diella asked if it was that obvious. She then requested a flower, intending to give it to him. But the moment she entered his room, everything shifted. The flower slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. She froze, tears forming as his words reached her. There was nothing left for him to teach her. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the quiet turning of a season, reminding her that neither winter nor spring lasts forever. The scene returned to the Duke's office, where Derek sat across from him in quiet composure. He explained that the Duke had likely already realized Diella belonged to the School of the Wild, and that her nature was especially strong even among them. It was not something meant to be restrained. If he continued teaching her, he admitted he would only end up limiting her growth. The Duke listened in silence before acknowledging the truth. If that was the case, then there was no longer a reason for Derek to remain in the mansion. Derek agreed without hesitation. For a moment, it seemed the Duke wanted to say more, but instead he stood and walked to the window, turning his back, looking outside. He spoke quietly because of Derek. Many things had changed. His daughter had grown, and he himself realized how much he had neglected as a father while focusing on his duties. Now he felt a sense of relief. After a pause, he asked the inevitable question, when Derek planned to leave. Derek answered that he would depart alongside Iseline when she returned to Ebelstein. The Duke accepted this, then instructed him to return the library key immediately. Derek glanced briefly at the 3-star spellbook in his hand before complying. When dismissed, he gave a respectful farewell and left the room. The Duke never turning back. In the corridor, Derek encountered Diella. She looked at him with clear frustration and hurt, questioning how he could appear so suddenly in her life and leave just as abruptly. He addressed her calmly, saying it could not be helped. Though she knew he would not change his decision, she still asked if he could stay. Instead of answering immediately, he stepped closer and lowered himself to meet her eyes. He explained that he would return to life as a mercenary and continue pursuing magic. When she grew stronger and made her debut in Ebelstein, they could meet again. Tears gathered in her eyes, but he smiled faintly and added that if he improved by then, he might have something new to teach her. Her sadness shifted into frustration, as she called him irritating for always saying exactly the right thing. He simply remained as he was. That night Diella slept, but rest did not come easily. A nightmare gripped her. Harsh voices surrounded her, calling her useless, untalented, a disgrace unworthy of her name. Fear tightened around her until she suddenly woke. Crying out, a maid rushed in, worried, asking if she was all right. For a brief moment, Diella's thoughts wavered. She remembered how she used to behave, angry, difficult, out of control. A dangerous idea formed. If she returned to that version of herself, created problems again, perhaps Derek would not be able to leave. The thought lingered. The maid asked again with concern. For an instant, Diella almost lashed out, but stopped. Instead, she answered calmly that she was fine. In that moment, she made a decision. She would not go back to who she was. Becoming that person again would not make her valuable. She lay back, her resolve quiet but firm. Morning arrived, sunlight filling the courtyard as departure preparations settled into place. Iseline waited inside the carriage, while Derek arrived with his belongings. She asked if being dropped off at the commercial district would be suitable. He accepted, and she told him to say his goodbyes. The household had gathered. Rig stepped forward first, asking if he was truly leaving. Derek confirmed he was returning to where he belonged. Rig acknowledged his efforts, and the prince added that he could reach out if he ever needed help. Derek thanked him respectfully, then his gaze shifted to Diella. She met his eyes but quickly grew flustered, insisting he should not misunderstand. She would not beg him to stay. She was no longer a child. Derek smiled faintly and said it had been an honor to teach her. Though he could not call himself her teacher with pride, he hoped she would remember what she had learned. She lifted her chin confidently, declaring that she would proudly call him her teacher. With playful pride, she claimed he would no longer be able to live quietly as the teacher of Diella Catherine Duplain. Yet behind her confidence, sadness lingered. Turning slightly away, she told him to take care and avoid unnecessary danger. He replied in kind, telling her not to overexert herself. She insisted firmly that she was already an adult and could take care of herself, repeating it as if convincing herself. Her words stirred an old memory within him, when he had once spoken himself. For a brief moment, the past overlapped with the present. Then softly, he called her name. Reaching out, he gently patted her head. She froze in surprise. He told her she did not need to grow up so quickly. Tears filled her eyes, but she held them back. He stepped away and turned. As he began to leave, she called out to him. He stopped and looked back. Forcing a bright smile, she said they would meet again. He lowered his head in farewell, agreeing they would meet again in Ebelstein. Her voice softened as she answered, and this time she could not stop the tears. By evening, Derek arrived in the Ebelstein commercial district. Noise filled the streets as two men shouted nearby, urging someone on in a fight. He approached quietly. A blonde woman was striking a boy. Blood visible on his face, she moved again, then suddenly paused, sensing something. Turning around, she saw him. Her expression lit up instantly. She called his name. Derek looked at her calmly and replied that he had returned home. The scene shifted into the lively interior of Belden's tavern, where laughter and chatter filled the air, completely different from the tension that had followed Derek earlier. Behind the counter, Jiden raised a glass of honey wine with a playful grin, teasing that nobles like to pretend it was refined, even though Derek had always enjoyed it plainly. Derek accepted it with a quiet nod. Jiden waved it off as a welcome drink. Free of charge, nearby Pine watched him closely, narrowing her eyes as if inspecting him. She teased that he looked paler than before, wondering if noble life had drained him. Derek tilted his head slightly, not quite following her meaning, and said nothing. Her smirk widened as she leaned in, pressing him for details about his time as a magic teacher. Derek answered simply that he had just worked there, nothing more. Pine reacted dramatically, accusing him of sounding like a noble already. Before she could continue, Jiden cut in and handed her a drink. That only made her more annoyed, complaining loudly about how she had struggled alone while he was gone. Jiden joked that at least Derek must have earned a fortune, but Derek shook his head, calmly stating that what he gained was far more valuable than money. Without further explanation, he placed a book on the table. The moment Jiden saw it, his expression froze in shock. Pine leaned in, excitement rising instantly. When Derek clarified it was a 3-star spellbook, both of them were stunned. Jiden immediately suspected theft, warning how dangerous it would be to possess something so rare. Pine, on the other hand, lit up with excitement, asking where she could get one too. Derek calmly explained it had been given to him by the Grand Duke. That only made Pine more animated, imagining herself working among nobles. Derek, however, ignored the outburst and returned to reading, letting the excitement fade on its own. After a while, the atmosphere settled. Without looking up, he asked if any new requests had come in. Pine had already fallen asleep nearby, exhausted, leaving Jiden to answer. Surprised, Jiden asked if he was really taking work already. Derek replied that he wanted something light to regain his edge. Jiden dismissed the concern, pointing out there was always demand for mages. Derek closed the book slightly and decided to begin the next day. Morning came quickly. Derek and Pine set out together on a mission, traveling deep into the wilderness. Along the way, they fought off goblins and even a massive spider, pushing forward through constant danger. By night, they finally rested. Pine relaxed after the exhausting battles, but Derek remained focused on his spellbook. Even in the quiet, he practiced controlling mana, trying to grasp the complexity of 3-star magic. For a brief moment, it seemed to work, until a sudden explosion tore through the night. Lighting up the darkness, the attempt had failed. Undeterred, he returned to studying, analyzing the intricate spell structures with unwavering determination. Days passed, then weeks. Seasons shifted until winter covered the land in snow. Eventually, they returned to the tavern. Pine complained loudly about the cold, while Jiden laughed, impressed they had traveled so far in such weather. Derek quietly placed their spoils on the counter. Among them was a harpy's head, something that drew disbelief and amusement from Jiden. Derek simply remarked that he finally felt alive again. Jiden smiled, then mentioned a new request, simple, but well-paying. It came from the Royal Mercenary Corps. A noble family needed a commoner for magic sparring practice. Essentially, someone to take hits. The scene shifted to a grand sparring arena in the noble district. An elderly instructor stood beside a red-haired girl named Elmi. Curious, she asked about her opponent. The instructor explained it would be a commoner, meant for practicing offensive magic. Elmi frowned, unimpressed, realizing the setup meant she would simply overpower someone weaker, even when told the opponent could handle one-star magic. She pointed out the vast gap between levels. Soon after, they entered the arena. Derrick was already there, sitting calmly, showing no sign of tension. When Elmi approached, she studied him with curiosity and introduced herself. His name felt oddly familiar to her. Though she could not place it, the instructor signaled for them to begin. At the center of the arena, Elmi asked if he understood sparring etiquette. Derrick confirmed that he did. She told him to resist as much as possible, planning to end the match quickly. Before the fight began, Derrick asked a question that caught her off guard: how much resistance she expected from him. Confused, she told him to give everything he had. A faint smile appeared on his face. Mana began to gather around him, quiet but controlled as he prepared himself. With steady confidence, he accepted her terms and readied for the spar. Blue magic gathered slowly in Derrick's palm as he stood in the sparring arena, facing Lady Alant. The air between them grew heavy with magical energy as both fighters prepared calmly for the battle ahead. Lady Alant began a soft, controlled chant, her voice elegant as power condensed in her hand. While observing him, she acknowledged his unusual talent, recognizing that reaching one-star level at such a young age was impressive. At the same time, she viewed his composure as arrogance and believed he needed to be reminded of the gap between nobles and commoners. When her chant ended, she released a powerful wave of magic toward him. The attack surged forward with destructive force, but Derrick noticed it instantly. Remaining calm, he stepped aside and moved back just enough to evade it effortlessly. The spell flew past him and exploded into the trees, slicing through thick trunks as if they were paper. Splinters and dust scattered across the ground. Lady Alant narrowed her eyes in disbelief. His effortless evasion felt almost insulting, and his calm demeanor irritated her further. She felt anger rising, convinced there was no reason for a commoner to remain so composed before a noble mage. Determined to correct his attitude, she began chanting again. As her voice echoed, multiple magic circles formed beneath her feet, glowing with cold energy. Countless ice arrows materialized in the air, gathering like a frozen storm. Confident that no one at his level could defend against it, she launched them all at once. The icy barrage filled the air, rushing toward him from every direction. Derrick showed no panic. He raised one hand and cast a simple spell. The moment the magic collided, every ice arrow shattered before reaching him. The fragments scattered across the arena, glittering as they fell near her feet. She froze briefly in disbelief, realizing such precise control over a basic spell required exceptional mastery. Nearby, the observing teacher watched with growing interest. The display suggested experience far beyond that of a typical student, reinforcing rumors that Derrick had once been a veteran mercenary. Recognizing her mistake, Lady Alant abandoned testing and prepared a stronger attack. Golden energy swirled around her as she chanted again. Flames of light danced around her body, forming dozens of radiant arrows filled with destructive power. Derrick calmly observed her shift in strategy and understood she intended to overwhelm the entire arena. She released the arrows in a storm of golden light. The barrage covered a wide area, leaving no space to dodge. Derrick quickly formed a defensive barrier and braced himself. The arrows struck repeatedly, explosions echoing across the arena as dust and debris filled the air. Lady Alant watched from a distance, confident the attack would break through. However, as the smoke cleared, Derrick remained standing, holding the barrier firmly without injury. Before the moment could settle, he sensed rapid movement. Lady Alant had used the explosions as cover and rushed forward with impressive speed, wielding a massive ice spear. At such close range, even Derrick felt momentary surprise and acknowledged her sharp combat instincts. He reacted instantly, releasing a small spell that froze the air and created a blinding flash. She shut her eyes, cursing under her breath. When she opened them again, Derrick had disappeared. Unable to see clearly, she steadied her breathing and focused on her surroundings, relying on sound. Soon she sensed faint movement nearby. When she spotted him again, he stood calmly with 3 small spells floating around him. He launched them one by one. She dodged with difficulty, confused by his silent approach. Then she realized the truth. He had used a delusion spell to erase sound, predicting she would rely on hearing. The realization angered her further. As it confirmed, he had been holding back from the beginning. Derrick continued controlling his spells, firing another attack that forced her to block. At that moment, he rushed forward aggressively. She smirked, confident in her rapid spell casting, believing she could counter him instantly. However, something unexpected caught her attention. Magic appeared beneath his feet instead of his hands. Startled, she jumped back and realized he was channeling magic through his feet. With each step, small spells flashed from his toes. Under relentless pressure, she struggled to dodge. The unpredictable rhythm caused her to lose balance and fall. The observing teacher widened his eyes, recognizing the technique as part of the school of the wild, where magic could flow from any part of the body, making movements nearly impossible to predict. On the ground, Lady Alant looked up at him and admitted he was an extremely interesting opponent. She acknowledged she had underestimated him, believing the rumors were exaggerated. Slowly, she approached and expressed genuine appreciation, recognizing that the fight had taught her something valuable. A gentle smile appeared on her face, creating the impression that the duel had ended peacefully. However, in the next instant, she adapted quickly and used the same technique he had demonstrated. A spark formed at her toe and shot forward like an arrow. Derrick reacted immediately, intercepting the attack with his hand and catching it with his own magic. With a swift motion, he redirected it back toward her. She cried out in surprise and tried to dodge. At that exact moment, Derrick leaped forward, launching another attack while her balance was disrupted. His eyes were focused and intense as she stared in shock, realizing the battle had reached its decisive point, where even the smallest mistake would determine the victor. Writing a sharp crack of magic tore through the training grounds, echoing beneath the open sky. Violet energy trailed behind his outstretched hand, distorting the air in its wake. Below him, Lady Alant stood firm, her gaze unwavering as she prepared to receive the attack. The clash that followed was brief yet intense. Ending the instant, a bell rang sharply across the field, signaling the conclusion of their duel. Derrick landed with controlled precision, the fading glow of magic dissolving from his hand. Without arrogance or triumph, he offered a respectful nod, expressing quiet gratitude for the match. His demeanor held neither pride nor mockery, only acknowledgement. Lady Alant remained silent for a moment, allowing the weight of her defeat to settle. Beneath the bright expanse of the estate sky, the outcome was undeniable, yet instead of frustration, a faint smile appeared on her lips as she acknowledged his skill. She regarded him as a splendid mage, someone far beyond the ordinary. Derrick redirected the praise back to her. From his perspective, her ability to stand against him deserved recognition. He noted her exceptional reflexes and perception, unlike anything he had encountered. To him, her awareness suggested experience in a harsh and unforgiving world. She received his words with quiet amusement, interpreting them as proof that such skill could only come from relentless hardship. Despite his status as a commoner, she believed his strength had been carved through relentless effort. Derrick did not deny this. Instead, he implied that survival in his line of work left no room for weakness. Life as a mercenary demanded constant struggle, where strength was a necessity rather than a luxury. Their conversation gradually shifted. Lady Alant grew curious about his background, subtly probing his origins. She had heard he was a refugee from the north, yet his combat style matched nothing she recognized. In her thoughts, only one figure resembled such a method of fighting, a feared individual known as the Emperor's Dog. Still, she dismissed the idea, reasoning that such a person could not simply appear as a displaced refugee. When pressed further, Derrick remained reserved. He gave no obligation to reveal his past, and instead offered a vague explanation, suggesting his abilities came from a personal skill developed on his own. His words neither confirmed nor denied her suspicions, leaving an air of mystery between them. Then the name Isaline Aliner surfaced, subtly altering the atmosphere. Derrick's attention sharpened at its mention, though he did not openly react. Lady Alant noted that she had encountered Isaline before, and the discussion deepened. She spoke of Isaline's position, hinting at power struggles in the north, and questioned what Derrick truly knew about her. His response remained minimal, yet the implication was clear. Isaline was strong, not in a conventional sense, but on an entirely different level. Eventually, the conversation came to a pause, and Lady Alant dismissed him. Derrick turned without hesitation, his footsteps echoing against the stone as he left the gazebo. As he walked away, something stirred in her memory. The name Derrick of the Beldun Mercenary Corps resurfaced, accompanied by a distant recollection. A vision formed in her mind of Isaline, calm and smiling, speaking that very name. The connection struck like lightning. Without hesitation, Lady Alant surged forward and grasped his wrist. Stopping him, a sharp breath escaped her as realization took hold. She demanded confirmation, pressing him with urgency as she connected him to a story she had once heard. He was the mercenary who had transformed an incompetent girl named Dila into a mage. By the time they moved indoors, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the estate. Inside the study, the warm glow of the fireplace flickered against the walls, contrasting the tension in the room. Without delay, Lady Alant laid out her intentions. She declared her willingness to do anything to gain the strength needed to defeat Isoline. Her determination was clear, though beneath it lay something more raw. When pressed, she clarified that her goal was not merely to match Isoline, but to surpass her, or at least win their upcoming spar. Derrick observed her quietly, noting the intensity of her ambition. At first, he described it as remarkable competitiveness, but she rejected the notion. She admitted the truth plainly. What drove her was jealousy, an emotion she considered dirty and pathetic. Yet she did not hide it. As she stared into her tea, her reflection wavered along with her thoughts. She confessed that her past actions toward Isoline had been misguided. No matter how much she gossiped or searched for flaws, Isoline had responded only with understanding, even attempting to embrace her instead of retaliating. When questioned about her honesty, she explained that she wished to prove her sincerity, even if it meant exposing her most shameful side. She was willing to do so. She understood that Derrick, having spent time with the Duplain family, knew both Isoline's capabilities and her own limitations. That was precisely why she sought his guidance. The fire crackled loudly, its glow reflecting in their cups as silence settled between them. Then, unable to hold back any longer, she asked what must be done to defeat Isoline. Derrick acknowledged Isoline's overwhelming strength. He implied that she had already surpassed what most would expect, perhaps reaching a level beyond measurement. Compared to that, Lady Alant's chances were nearly non-existent. He stated the truth plainly. She could not defeat her. The words lingered heavily in the air, yet they failed to shake her resolve. Instead of retreating, she leaned forward, her determination hardening. Even if the odds were impossibly low, she still intended to win. For her, the question was no longer about possibility, but about will. She reminded him of something significant. He had once taken someone completely worthless in magic and turned her into a mage. If such a transformation had been possible before, she demanded to know if he could do the same for her. For a brief moment, he remained silent. Then he admitted there might be a method worth attempting. Though his tone carried hesitation, certain concerns needed to be addressed before any agreement could be made. Her expression shifted instantly. Desperation gave way to anticipation as she urged him to continue. Ready to hear any conditions, Derrick began by asking whether she knew how he had trained Lady Dila. Lady Alant admitted she did not, but insisted it did not matter. She was willing to do anything to win. He reminded her that he was a mercenary, implying consequences. She dismissed his concern passionately, assuming he meant social judgment. She declared that gossip or disdain meant nothing to her. Her ambitions far outweighed such trivial matters. She stated her intention to become someone whose name would echo throughout the empire. Failing to stand at the top of Ebelstein's social circle would be unacceptable. As he watched her silently, she suddenly slammed the table, insisting that he must not question her sincerity over something so trivial. She emphasized that she knew what mattered more than pride. After observing her a moment longer, Derrick calmly clarified his meaning. His point was that she needed to pay him. Because he was a mercenary, she was caught off guard, initially preparing to respond before pausing. Realization set in and she blushed, awkwardly agreeing that she would pay whatever he asked. She nervously remarked that the room felt unusually hot. Derrick looked at her with a darkened expression, in his thoughts if she was truly serious. Then he would respond to her determination with equally harsh methods. The scene shifted to a quiet garden where an angel statue stood at the center. Nearby, Aline spoke calmly with a small group, noting that the next gathering would include a magic duel. She mentioned that Lady Eleni's skills had improved greatly and concluded that she needed to prepare as well. One girl beside her reacted with mild frustration at another meeting arriving so soon, while another expressed eager interest in participating. At that moment, Ellen approached them with polite composure and addressed Aline. As Aline noticed her, she greeted her in return. Meanwhile, Ellen inwardly reacted with a smug satisfaction, expecting frustration and jealousy, believing she had taken something valuable away from Aline. However, contrary to her expectations, Elaine's expression brightened with genuine warmth. She congratulated Ellen sincerely, expressing belief that she had made a wise decision and that the person she chose must be trustworthy. Her smile carried no hidden resentment, only honest goodwill. This unexpected response caught Ellen off guard. She responded awkwardly, unable to reconcile the reaction with what she had anticipated. As Elaine observed her, a memory surfaced of a past conversation with her younger sister, where she had suggested asking Derrick for additional lessons to improve her progress. In that memory, her sister had hesitated and gently refused, emphasizing that it was unnecessary and expressing how important Elaine was to her. Returning to the present, Elaine stood quietly, lost in thought, watching her. Ellen internally insisted that Elaine must understand the situation now, believing she had taken something significant from her. Despite this, Elaine remained calm and began to speak, attempting to explain something about Derrick. Before she could finish, Ellen abruptly cut her off, claiming she needed to leave for her first lesson. With a simple smile, she departed. As Elaine watched her leave, she reflected calmly that Derrick was not the type to do anything truly troubling. Nearby, Denise quietly observed everything while sipping her tea, concluding inwardly that everyone was simply trying to make a living. The scene then transitioned smoothly to the interior of Belden's tavern. There, Derrick spoke to Jayden, setting aside distractions and focusing on upcoming work. Jayden questioned why tasks related to the Bellamy family kept accumulating. Derrick calmly explained that the situation would not require travel, as it could be handled within Ebelstein. Jayden remained skeptical, wondering whether their young lady could truly defeat Lady Elaine in a duel. Derrick acknowledged the difficulty, but stated that it was not impossible. He explained that if Lady Ellen could reach second-rank magic, they could use that advantage to secure victory. As Jayden continued working, lifting a heavy barrel, he urged him to set aside optimism and present a realistic plan. Derrick grew serious and revealed that he needed Jayden's help. Jayden listened but struggled to understand, prompting Derrick to clarify further that they would also need Pellaine's assistance to ensure safety. Even then, Jayden sensed danger in the plan and questioned whether it was reckless. Derrick admitted openly that it was extremely dangerous. At that moment, Pellaine suddenly burst into tears, venting frustration about being scammed and losing everything. Her emotional outburst stunned both men. After a brief pause, Jayden sighed and handed her money in an attempt to calm her. The scene then shifted again to a training ground where Ellen stood prepared. Derrick began her lesson by announcing that they would start with live combat training. He explained they would repeat the exercise 10 times to analyze her abilities in detail. Ellen reacted with surprise at the idea of 10 consecutive battles. Derrick confirmed that he needed to observe her real combat performance. She commented on his harsh, mercenary-like teaching style but accepted it, noting she had not hired him for lectures. Without reacting much, Derrick released a small amount of energy and initiated the session. As time passed, the training ground became completely devastated from the intensity of the battles. Ellen stood exhausted, barely able to remain upright. Derrick calmly acknowledged her effort and allowed a 10-minute rest before continuing with theory. She reacted in disbelief, claiming she had no mana left. He responded firmly, insisting she still had more to draw out and instructing her to correct her technique and create additional ice spears. Despite repeated attempts, she continued to fail. Derrick remained strict, questioning her capability and demanding even more output, pushing her to create additional magic arrows. Struggling to stand, Ellen insisted she had no mana left, but he dismissed her excuses and urged her to continue. Pushed beyond her limits, she eventually collapsed. Observing this, Derrick simply stated that she had worked hard and could go to dinner. Then he asked if she was truly all right, adding that giving up was always an option if necessary. Despite exhaustion, Ellen continued smiling. She responded with confidence, explaining that such hardship was nothing compared to what she had endured in noble society. To her, this level of effort was insignificant. Hearing this, Derrick showed a hint of interest and admitted he may have underestimated her. Slowly regaining her footing, Ellen claimed she was only tired from a prior social event and promised to show her true abilities the next day. She even requested increased training intensity, dismissing the current session as a light warm-up. Derrick listened quietly before responding with confusion at her mention of tomorrow. As she looked at him, puzzled, he calmly clarified that the current pause was only a dinner break. Ellen attempted to laugh it off as a joke, but Derrick immediately corrected her with complete seriousness, stating that he had not taken the job to joke with her. Under the blazing sunlight, training begins in earnest as Derrick drives Lady Alant far past her limits. He demands 5 more magic arrows, and her body trembles under the strain, pain forcing ragged breaths from her chest. Yet the white-haired mentor shows no mercy, insisting she hasn't reached her true limit. Mana flickers around her, hinting at untapped power, but Derrick only raises the stakes, doubling his demand to 10 arrows. Shock flashes across her face, but when given the choice between more magic or a punishing run, she forces her exhausted legs to move. Choosing to run, her strength finally gives out, and she collapses onto a garden bench, breath uneven, as Derrick leans in to assess her. An unexpected smile crosses her lips. She admits she enjoys the suffering. When he offers her the option to give up, she rejects it outright. Surrender is not a choice. Her defiance earns her no rest. Derrick immediately calls her back to spar. 2 relentless weeks pass beneath the cold winter sun. Alant slumps over a stone table, her red hair spilling across it as exhaustion overtakes her. She asks Lady Denise to wake her when Lady Elan arrives, admitting how drained she is from constant training. Denise agrees gently, but can't help asking why Alant pushes herself so far. Alant's answer is simple and unwavering. She wants to win. Nothing else matters. Second place does not exist for her. Denise offers quiet encouragement, but the calm breaks when Elan suddenly appears. Panic jolts through Alant, and she bolts upright, desperate not to be seen in such a disheveled state. From afar, Elan casually invites others to visit a new clothing store. Unaware of the storm, she stirs within Alant. Hiding her face, Alant anxiously asks if her rival has left. Relief comes when Denise confirms she has, though the shame lingers. Even so, Elan pauses briefly, her blue eyes reflecting subtle concern as she notices Alant's exhaustion. The rivalry hangs heavy, even without words. Later in her chambers, a maid presents Alant with an ornate chest from House Duplain, a gift from Lady Isoline. Inside are rare mana recovery elixirs. The explanation barely finishes before Alant's expression turns cold. She orders everything thrown away. Confused, the maid hesitates, but Alant repeats herself firmly, demanding the gifts be removed at once. Refocusing, she asks for Derrick. He has already been preparing since dawn. A letter nearby speaks of Winter's arrival and wishes for everyone's well-being, mentioning Isoline's territory and its offerings. Alant interprets it as pity, her jaw tightening as her resolve hardens. Gray clouds gather as she steps into the courtyard where Derrick waits. Skipping pleasantries, she demands an honest evaluation of her progress. He studies her in silence before bluntly suggesting she consider giving up. The words cut deep, igniting her anger. She challenges him, furious that he would even suggest surrender. Though he offers a hollow apology, he does not take it back. Her voice trembles as she insists her only goal is victory. She demands to know how to defeat Isoline, reminding him she hired him to win, not to hear defeatist advice. If he won't help, he can leave. But Derrick remains unmoved. Instead, he asks what she will do if victory is impossible. He explains that an obsession with winning can hinder growth, and that accepting defeat may sometimes be necessary. Alant recoils, tears spilling down her face as she rejects his words. In a moment of raw honesty, she confesses everything, spreading rumors about Isoline, rejecting the image others have of her, admitting she is petty and consumed by jealousy. She realizes she no longer has a reason to hate Isoline, because the hatred was never truly directed at her. It was always directed inward. Her voice breaks as she names the truth: self-hatred. Her drive to win is nothing more than an attempt to escape her own inferiority. She wanted Derrick to see her resolve, even if it meant exposing her ugliest self. Silence hangs heavy after her confession. Then Derrick steps forward, his voice is firm. Unwavering, they will win. His promise cuts through her despair as sunlight glints off his silver hair. Alant looks up, something new igniting within her. A quiet determination replaces her turmoil. She accepts his words with a simple nod and steps forward into her renewed purpose. The scene shifted to days later, as a carriage advanced steadily before halting at a grand location, revealed to be the territory and residence of Count Belmer. From within, a lone figure emerged, identified as Lady Alant's former teacher. As he surveyed his surroundings, a red-haired man approached with composed demeanor, welcoming him and remarking that the journey to Averstein must have gone smoothly. The teacher maintained proper decorum, offered respectful greetings, and inquired about the Lord's well-being. In response, the noble acknowledged the journey must have been tiring and invited him to sit and rest. Both took their seats and settled into a calm conversation. After a brief pause, the noble reflected that it had been quite some time since he last saw Lady Alant and expressed curiosity about how she had been doing. The teacher responded that she was progressing well and noted that she had recently been dedicating significant effort to improving her magical abilities. Hearing this, the red-haired man reacted with visible amusement and admiration, remarking that he had never encountered a girl with such extraordinary talent, and confidently adding that it would not be long before she surpassed even him. As the teacher observed the noble, anxious thoughts took hold, realizing he could not allow the truth to surface that Lady Alant was being trained by a commoner, since such a revelation would bring severe consequences upon both of them. Meanwhile, the noble casually mentioned he also had matters to attend to in Averstein, prompting the teacher to respond with polite composure and assure him that Lady Alant would undoubtedly be delighted. Yet inwardly, he was gripped with dread. The man then expressed playful curiosity about surprising Lady Alant with an unexpected visit and a gift, wondering how she might react. Outwardly, the teacher maintained composure, while inwardly hoping only that he would somehow make it through the ordeal unscathed. The scene then shifted to the outskirts of Averstein, where a massive door stood ominously, marking the entrance to the nameless labyrinth. Peline voiced her unease, remarking that something about the situation felt wrong and questioning whether it was truly wise to send someone as fragile as Alant into a dungeon. In response, Jadden calmly suggested that Derrick must have already considered everything carefully. As doubts continued among the group, Alant, clearly startled, realized she was the one expected to enter the dungeon. Overwhelmed with uncertainty, she questioned what exactly she was supposed to do inside and whether she was simply meant to fight monsters head-on. Stepping in, Derrick reassured her that it was the weakest dungeon in the region and explained that her task was to hone her instincts through real combat, adding that he and his colleagues would be watching over her to ensure her safety. Still gripped by anxiety, Lady Alant questioned whether the situation was truly serious. Finding it hard to believe, in response, Derrick released an intense surge of energy and spoke firmly, explaining that the duel was only days away and time was limited, making this the most efficient preparation method. With that, he moved forward along with the others. Lady Alant, having heard everything, appeared increasingly uneasy, as it seemed to be her first time entering a monster-filled dungeon. Soon, all four proceeded together, surrounded by unsettling silence that heightened the tension. After a brief moment, driven by curiosity and fear, she hesitantly wondered what awaited them inside. Derrick responded sternly, instructing her to stay alert at all times and emphasizing that even the weakest dungeon could be dangerous. His words deepened her nervousness. At that moment, Peline, who had been observing carefully, suddenly warned that a horde of goblins was approaching. Hearing this, Lady Alant panicked and reacted loudly. However, Derrick remained composed, noting he had already sensed them from behind. Shortly after, Jadden pointed out a larger threat approaching, identifying it as something resembling an ogre. This only deepened Alant's fear. As tension rose, Derrick turned to Jadden and questioned whether he could handle the ogre. Jadden remained unfazed and responded with a confident smirk, implying his willingness depended on payment. In response, a powerful surge of energy radiated from Derrick as he stated that payment could be discussed later, making survival the priority. At that moment, all shifted their attention forward as numerous glowing eyes emerged from the darkness and drew closer. Lady Alant stood frozen, trembling as the reality of fighting monsters set in. Before she could recover, the goblins charged. Derrick stepped to the front line and intercepted them head-on. Behind him, she struggled to speak, her fear rendering her nearly voiceless. Acting swiftly, Derrick ordered Peline to protect her and dashed into battle with precision. Peline supported from a distance, firing arrows to eliminate threats from multiple directions, while Derrick unleashed swordsmanship combined with fiery power, cutting down enemies one after another. The team executed their roles with remarkable coordination. Amidst the chaos, Alant remained completely still, overwhelmed and unable to grasp what to do. Her mind was paralyzed by fear and confusion. In that moment, she sensed a massive presence behind her and recognized it as the creature mentioned earlier. The scene revealed Jadden standing firmly in its path, holding his sword with calm confidence and remarking curiosity about the bounty on the monster. The giant goblin charged, but in a swift motion Jadden stepped forward and cleanly severed its arm. Meanwhile, Derrick continued cutting down enemies relentlessly with blazing attacks. Witnessing everything, Lady Alant was left stunned as her composure crumbled. Sweat ran down her face as panic overtook her thoughts, and she realized she could truly die there. The intensity made everything feel impossible to handle. At that moment, Derrick turned back and urgently warned that a goblin was charging straight toward her. Urging her to stay alert, the goblin closed in with lethal intent. Fear overtook her completely, making her believe she was about to die. Her mind went blank and her body froze. From behind, Derrick's voice echoed firmly, insisting she had to defeat it herself. Hearing this, something within her began to shift. A realization took hold as the goblin drew closer. Fragments of her past surfaced, forcing her to confront herself, as she admitted inwardly how naive and pathetic she had been. The goblin raised its weapon as more memories echoed, reminding her she had been all talk and no action. She recognized the version of herself that envied others and spoke behind their backs. Yet amidst the terror, her perspective changed and determination formed. She realized this moment was why she came, to confront her weaknesses and end her former self. At that critical moment, Lady Alant activated her ability, drawing courage as she summoned a massive ice arrow, its chilling energy forming vividly before her. Simultaneously, the goblin lunged forward to strike. From a distance, Derrick observed closely without interfering. In the next instant, the ice arrow surged forward with immense force, piercing through the goblin and tearing past it completely, bringing it down in a single decisive blow. It was Lady Alant who accomplished this, marking a turning point. The rest of the team witnessed the moment and felt quiet admiration. Until then, she had contributed nothing, appearing almost helpless, but now she had defeated a goblin on her own. After the attack, she remained standing, trembling slightly from fear and adrenaline. Gradually, she lifted her gaze toward her teacher. With a calm demeanor, he remarked that this was only the beginning. Hearing those words, she responded with a soft smile, her eyes reflecting newfound determination, as she realized she had finally taken her first true step forward. Beneath the tall stone walls of Eberstein, Derrick sat quietly, reading the same letter once again. It was from his former master, Katja Flameheart. In it, she mentioned that more than 2 years had passed since she left Eberstein and apologized for reaching out so late. She explained that she was currently teaching the young lady of House Oster and had been quite busy, as the girl showed great enthusiasm for magic. Despite that, Katja reflected fondly on the time she had spent in Eberstein, recalling that those difficult days had given her a rare sense of freedom and joy. She also wrote that among all the mages she had encountered, Derrick stood out as the most talented. Curious about his progress, she asked what level he had reached by now and told him that when they met again, he should show her how far he had come. The letter ended simply, signed by his old master. For the past 2 weeks, Derrick had returned to that letter whenever he had a moment. Lady Alant, who often saw him reading it, eventually asked about it. He told her it was from his master. She remarked that his teacher must have been remarkable to have the patience to guide someone like him. Derrick responded without hesitation that she truly was an exceptional mentor. When he did not react further, Alant admitted she had only been trying to tease him. Derrick calmly asked which part was meant to provoke him, leaving her momentarily speechless. With nothing more to say, she let the matter drop. He then reminded her that their duel was only 2 days away, and asked how she felt about it. Alant hesitated at first, unsure of her answer. After a moment of reflection, she studied herself, smiled with determination, and declared that she intended to win. Soon after, the scene shifted to the Noble District's magic dueling grounds, where a large crowd had already gathered. The air was filled with anticipation. Among the spectators, Azeline was chatting with a friend when she noticed Derrick passing by. Recognizing him immediately, she excused herself and called out to him. She greeted him warmly, mentioning that it had been a while and that she had heard he was now overseeing Lady Alant's magic training. Derrick replied simply that their meeting had been nothing more than coincidence. After a short pause, Azeline remarked that Derrick had not changed at all and wondered if he might be pushing Lady Alant too hard. She mentioned hearing from Dela that he was not exactly a conventional teacher, and that Alant had seemed noticeably worn out lately. Derrick responded calmly, pointing out that worrying about one's opponent often meant having confidence in oneself. Caught off guard, Azeline asked what he meant, and he simply advised her not to underestimate any opponent. No matter who they were, around them, the nobles had already begun whispering among themselves. Many believed Lady Aelin would win easily unless Alent managed to use two-star magic. Others quietly noted how pale and tired Alent looked. Soon, the atmosphere shifted as Lady Aelin made her entrance. Her elegance immediately drew attention, and many of the onlookers could not help but admire her beauty. Not far away, Alent stepped forward onto the field. Each step echoed as she repeated the same thought in her mind. She would win. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, her determination unwavering. With Derrick watching from behind, she approached her opponent. Aelin greeted her politely, expressing hope that she had been well. Alent returned the courtesy and added that Aelin's calm demeanor had always inspired her. Aelin denied it softly and admitted that she had never felt this nervous before a duel. Hearing that, Alent gave a small smile and suggested they begin. At once, both gathered their mana. Blue energy flowed around Aelin while bright orange flames surged around Alent. Their powers spread across the arena and clashed in the air. As the tension grew heavier, Alent made the first move. She launched a powerful attack, sending countless fire projectiles upward, until the sky above the arena was filled with blazing arrows. Moments later, they began to fall like a storm of fire. As she continued her assault, she recalled Derrick's training. He had told her that if the duel turned into a contest of pure magical skill, she would lose. When she had asked how she could win, his answer had been simple: through willpower. He had trained her to push herself to the limit and to use every last bit of mana she had. When she had joked about it being his strange hobby, he had denied it plainly. He explained that once both sides ran out of mana, the fight would no longer depend on technique, but on endurance. His strategy had been clear. She needed to make her magic as grand and overwhelming as possible, forcing the battle into a prolonged struggle. In the end, the one who could draw out even a little more mana would claim victory. When she had asked what would happen if Aelin's mana reserves were far greater, Derrick had answered bluntly that she would lose. Still, he reminded her of her lineage and told her to trust herself. Back in the present, the spectators watched in shock. Even Azeline could not help but wonder if Alent had always been this strong. Standing beneath the fiery storm, Alent raised her arm again, intensifying the barrage as flames rained down across the arena without pause. Despite the relentless attack, Aelin did not falter. Surrounded by her blue mana, she expanded her energy outward, forming a wide defensive barrier that held steady against the falling fire. Her expression sharpened as she focused completely on the battle, silently resolving that she would be the one to win. Lady Azeline attacked without hesitation, unleashing a storm of blazing arrows that rained down relentlessly on Ellen's position. The projectiles struck her barrier one after another, and although it held firm, the sheer force triggered a massive explosion that shook the battlefield. Smoke and fire spread across the arena as the crowd gasped, clearly witnessing the immense growth in Ellen's mana reserves. Even under such pressure, Ellen's barrier remained steady, glowing with controlled blue light. Calmly assessing the situation, she realized that while Ellen's firepower was overwhelming, it was being used without restraint and would quickly drain her mana. Through the smoke, Ellen sensed movement and identified a line repositioning under cover. Reacting instantly, she formed an ice arrow and fired it with perfect aim, seemingly piercing Ellen's chest, only for the figure to dissolve into an illusion. The realization stunned her briefly, and that single moment allowed a line to appear behind her, already prepared with a massive ice spear. At close range, Ellen barely sensed the attack in time. With no opportunity to raise a barrier, a memory surfaced of Derrick explaining a strategy: overwhelm vision with flames, mislead with illusion, then close in for a decisive strike. Back in the present, Aline executed that exact plan. Ellen quickly made a decision, gathering all her mana into a concentrated sphere and releasing it at the same moment Aline struck. The explosion forced her body backward, narrowly avoiding the spear, which shattered the ground on impact. Regaining her footing, Ellen stood firm while Aline froze in shock at the speed and precision of her movement. Realizing her opponent was far more skilled than expected, Aline resolved to overwhelm her with raw power. She immediately summoned countless ice spears from the ground without any incantation, covering the battlefield in a forest of sharp spikes while advancing relentlessly. The crowd was stunned by her ability to generate such massive magic purely through will. Derrick observed calmly, recognizing that Aline had taken the bait. Meanwhile, Ellen prepared to counter, acknowledging Aline's growth. However, Aline had already set a hidden trap. A previously concealed flame arrow rose silently into the sky and, at the perfect moment, descended upon Ellen's formation. Caught off guard, Ellen looked up in shock as the arrow destroyed her entire array of ice spears in seconds. She realized the attack had been planned from earlier, leaving her momentarily frozen. Aline lowered her hand with a faint smirk, sensing the momentum shifting in her favor. Ellen, however, began to feel uncertain, unable to predict Aline's next move. Even the spectators noticed that both fighters were now evenly matched. Doubt crept into Ellen's mind, as she realized she could not win under the current conditions. Taking a deep breath, she chose to reset the battle entirely. Her expression sharpened, and the hesitation vanished. Derrick noticed the shift instantly. As Ellen raised her hand, blue mana began to gather, growing denser with each passing moment. The pressure intensified so much that Aline struggled to endure it, feeling as if it was no longer magic but raw mana itself. Then suddenly, everything fell silent. The mana in the surroundings disappeared completely. Derrick recognized the phenomenon as mana alignment, a rare state where a mage surpasses their limits and forces all surrounding mana into submission. At that moment, Ellen raised her hand and formed a massive fire sphere above the battlefield. The blazing orb expanded rapidly, distorting the air and radiating intense heat and pressure. Aline could only stare in disbelief at its sheer size. Ellen remained unwavering, pouring all her mana into the spell and pushing beyond her limits. The fireball grew even larger, revealing itself as a 2-star fire spell brought into existence through sheer will and overwhelming power. Her mind briefly drifted back to a moment from her training, returning to a time after an exhausting session when Aline had collapsed onto the ground, completely drained. Her chest rose and fell heavily as sweat soaked her face while Derrick approached quietly, offering a water pouch with calm composure. Aline slowly pushed herself up and accepted it, murmuring her thanks, though uncertainty soon clouded her expression. In a tired voice, she admitted her doubts, questioning whether she could truly defeat Ellen after only a few weeks of training. Derrick looked at her with slight puzzlement, but responded without hesitation, assuring her that she would win, then pausing briefly to clarify that she would win in a certain sense. Still catching her breath, Aline looked at him in confusion, unable to fully grasp his meaning. The memory faded as the present snapped back into focus, and the crowd erupted in shock at the sight before them. Voices trembled in disbelief at the appearance of a massive fireball, questioning whether it was truly a 2-star spell. Aline's eyes widened as panic crept in, her mouth slightly open as she realized this was not part of the plan. Desperation rose within her as she glanced toward Derrick, silently asking what she was supposed to do. Yet he remained silent, watching without offering guidance. Frustration and fear overwhelmed her, tears welling in her eyes as anger surfaced within her thoughts. Before she could think further, the massive fireball surged forward. For a split second, Aline froze, then looked up as her breath caught. The enormous sphere of fire loomed directly above her, descending with unstoppable force. Panic took hold as her thoughts spiraled rapidly. She considered forming a barrier, but immediately realized she could not block a 2-star spell. She thought of using spears, but dismissed the idea just as quickly. Her mind began to collapse under the pressure as doubt consumed her, convincing her that defeating Ellen was impossible. Meanwhile, Ellen extended her hand, guiding the fireball forward with controlled force, her focus absolute despite the strain. In the crowd, Denise watched intently. Her eyes narrowed as she followed every movement while spectators stood frozen, unable to look away from the overwhelming display of power. Just as the fireball was about to strike, Aline's instincts took over. She released a burst of mana forward, using the recoil to propel herself backward. Ellen's eyes widened slightly in surprise at the sudden maneuver. A moment later, the fireball crashed into the ground, unleashing a devastating explosion that engulfed the battlefield. Flames and smoke erupted outward as the shockwave tore through the arena. Aline raised her arms to shield herself, but the force still pushed her back violently. Losing her balance, she rolled across the ground, narrowly avoiding the full impact. Smoke thickened, swallowing the battlefield in a dense haze. Ellen stood at the center, breathing heavily as the single attack consumed a massive portion of her mana, leaving her reserves significantly drained. Through the smoke, Aline slowly pushed herself onto her knees, struggling to catch her breath. Ellen stared at her with disbelief as realization set in, recognizing that Aline had dodged the attack, using a method she had only seen once. On the sidelines, Derrick remained calm, his expression unchanged as he observed the outcome. He quietly noted that a 2-star spell, when used without mastery, became nothing more than a beast that devoured its caster's mana. Aline's hand trembled slightly from exhaustion as she clenched her fist, trying to steady herself and regain control. Derrick watched her closely, recognizing her effort and sensing that she was beginning to change. Though Ellen had always possessed overwhelming talent, she was now going beyond it, giving everything she had. This was her way of showing respect through power rather than words, and anyone who fought this hard deserved her full strength. Ellen stood firmly despite the visible toll on her body. Sweat covered her face, her breathing was heavy, and her mana reserves were dangerously low. Yet she forced herself to remain composed. Across from her, Aline steadied her footing, equally exhausted with aching limbs and uneven breaths. But her eyes remained sharp and filled with determination. A faint smirk formed on her lips as understanding finally settled in her mind. She realized that if she could endure this moment, she would win. Ellen raised her hand once again, refusing to back down. Blue mana shifted into blazing heat as she began casting another spell. A sphere of fire formed above her palm, growing rapidly just like before. Her eyes remained focused and unwavering as she poured even more mana into it. Once again, she recreated the same massive 2-star fireball. But this time something was different. Her body trembled under the strain, her control wavering as sweat streamed down her face. She gritted her teeth, barely holding the spell together, yet continued pushing forward. With a forceful motion, she hurled the fireball toward Aline at full speed. Gasps erupted from the crowd as they realized it was even faster than before. The blazing sphere tore through the air with terrifying speed. Heading straight for its target, Aline reacted instantly, turning and running to evade it. But Ellen maintained control, adjusting its direction with subtle movements of her hand. The fireball curved through the air, tracking Aline's movements precisely and refusing to miss. However, maintaining such control came at a cost. Ellen's already depleted mana began draining even faster, pushing her closer to her limit. The fireball closed in rapidly, seeming unavoidable, but at the very last moment, Aline made her move. She dropped low, planting her hands firmly against the ground, then kicked upward while releasing a burst of magic beneath her. The force propelled her high into the air, allowing her to barely avoid the fireball as it rushed past below. She soared upward until her figure blended into the brightness of the sun. Ellen tried to track her, but the intense glare made it nearly impossible to see clearly. For a brief moment, Aline vanished from her sight. High above, hidden within the sunlight, Aline allowed herself a small, confident smile, raising her hand. She began forming ice spears one after another, suspending them around her as she prepared her next attack. From that height, she reasoned that Ellen would not be able to read the trajectory. As the spell completed, the air around her filled with sharp, gleaming spears, her focus sharpening further. She understood that if Ellen attempted to use a barrier, it would only drain what little mana she had left. Below, Ellen struggled to remain standing, her body trembling under exhaustion. Then with a swift motion, Aline hurled the ice spears downward at full speed. Ellen reacted at the last possible moment. Her legs gave slightly as she dropped to one knee, forcing herself to act despite her condition. With what little strength she had left, she cast a spell just as the ice spears were about to strike. A layer of ice formed in front of her. Intercepting the attack, the spears slammed into it, embedding themselves deeply into the hastily created shield. Aline frowned slightly as she landed back on the ground, realizing it was not a proper barrier, but a simple ice construct. She understood that Ellen had used too much mana controlling those fireballs. Ellen's condition was now clear. Her face had gone pale, her breathing ragged, and her body barely able to stay upright, as though she might collapse at any moment. From the sidelines, Derrick watched calmly, thinking that it would be over soon. Aline straightened her posture and stepped forward, confidence returning to her expression. A small smile spread across her face as her thoughts became clearer. She believed she had cornered Ellen, concluding that there was no way Ellen had any mana left. She calculated that she still had enough to cast magic arrows or ice spears at least 2 more times, convincing herself that it was more than enough to win. But the moment that thought crossed her mind, a sharp cracking sound echoed across the battlefield. Aline's eyes widened instantly as the ice shield in front of Ellen began to fracture from within rather than from the outside. Before Aline could react, a hidden fireball burst through the shattered ice. Ellen had cast it in secret, concealing it behind her defensive shield. With a desperate motion, Ellen released the fireball forward. The force of the spell was so great that it pushed her own body backward, threatening to throw her off balance as she gave everything she had left for one final attack. The force caused her to lose her footing, and she fell hard onto the ground, the impact knocking the breath out of her. Her face turned pale with pain as her body trembled, struggling to respond after being pushed far beyond its limits. At the same time, the fireball surged forward toward Aline, shattering her brief sense of certainty. However, as Ellen collapsed, her control over the spell broke. The fireball wavered mid-flight, its path becoming unstable. Instead of striking its target, it veered off course at the last moment, narrowly missing Aline and shooting upward into the sky before eventually dissipating. For a brief moment, everything fell still. Aline stood frozen, her body tense as she followed the fireball's path until it disappeared. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened, but slowly she calmed herself. Her breathing steadied as she lowered her guard slightly and shifted her gaze back toward Ellen. Watching her in silence, on the ground, Ellen's body trembled uncontrollably. She had used almost all of her mana, pushing far beyond what her body could safely handle. Her hands shook as she raised them weakly, staring at them with growing frustration. Desperation filled her thoughts as she tried to gather mana once more, forcing herself to cast another spell. A faint glow formed in her palm, weak and unstable, but it flickered almost immediately before fading away. No matter how hard she pushed, her body refused to respond. Aline stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her footsteps were slow but steady until she stopped right in front of Ellen. She did not attack, did not raise her hand, and did not speak. She simply stood there, looking down at her opponent in silence. Ellen slowly lifted her gaze to meet Aline's. For the first time, something unfamiliar appeared in her eyes. Fear began to surface. In Everstein, the nobles had always shone brighter than the rest, and Isaline had stood at the center of that brilliance. She had always been admired, always placed above everyone else. But for Alant, that same brilliance had only cast a long shadow, and she had lived within it for as long as she could remember. While Isaline grew up surrounded by praise and comfort, Alant endured whispers and mockery. People laughed at her, waiting eagerly to see her fail. Those memories remained deeply carved within her. Yet even so, she never stopped pushing forward. In that darkness, she continued to sharpen herself, holding on to the belief that one day she would rise above it and prove her worth. Her thoughts gradually faded as she returned to the present. Isaline was still on her knees. Exhausted, her mana nearly depleted. Her hands trembled slightly, yet her expression remained calm and composed. Even covered in dirt, and after collapsing before everyone, she carried herself with quiet dignity. That unshaken composure confused Alant. It felt as though Isaline had nothing to hide and nothing to protect. She simply gave everything she had without hesitation. From the stands, voices rang out loudly, cheering for Isaline to stand and continue. Still kneeling, Isaline tried to respond, struggling to steady her trembling body. At the same time, Alant stepped forward and raised her hand. Flames began to gather once more, forming the shape of another attack. For a brief moment, her eyes shifted toward out-Derrick as she recalled his words and guidance. She believed that she could win now, yet deep inside, something darker stirred. Even while standing on the edge of victory, a heavy feeling lingered, reminding her that no matter the outcome, she might still return to the same place she had started. Across from her, Isaline forced herself to move. She stared at her trembling hand, unable to accept how little strength remained. Even so, she pushed herself again, gathering what little mana she had left. A faint spark of energy flickered weakly in her palm as her hand trembled, struggling to maintain it. Then, without warning, Alant spoke, her words carrying a quiet weight that caught Isaline off guard. Isaline looked up, still holding onto that faint spark, sweat covering her face as confusion filled her eyes. Alant slowly lowered her hand and calmly admitted that she had run out of mana. For a moment, Isaline could not understand what she meant and simply stared. Trying to process it, Alant continued with a soft smile, praising Isaline's strength and acknowledging that she still could not surpass her. Before Isaline could react, Alant placed a hand over her chest, bowed slightly and surrendered. For a split second, silence filled the arena before it erupted into cheers. The crowd praised Isaline's victory, but she remained frozen, still kneeling on the ground with disbelief written across her face. Even as the cheers grew louder, she struggled to accept what had just happened. Her friends rushed toward her, congratulating her and asking about the powerful magic she had used. She responded with a shy smile, still overwhelmed. Soon, her attention shifted across the arena where Alant was already walking away alone. Nearby, Derrick stood holding a book. When he noticed her approaching, he quietly closed it and set it aside. Alant spoke lightly, asking whether he had seen everything clearly, and he responded briefly that it had been enough. She smiled in a playful manner, joking about how surprising her decision must have been and recalling Isoline's shocked expression during the match. As she spoke, laughter escaped her, but tears slowly began to form in her eyes. She wiped them away, trying to keep her tone light, and admitted that despite losing, she felt satisfied, as that reaction alone had made everything worthwhile. After a moment, she looked at him again and asked what he thought of her performance. Even if the ending was imperfect, she wanted to know whether she had done well. Derrick did not respond immediately. He simply watched her, paying close attention to her emotions. Gradually, her expression began to change. The smile faded, and tears started to fall without her understanding why. Confused, she tried to speak again, questioning herself, while Derrick remained silent. Noticing the tremble in her hands, Alant lowered her gaze, unable to hide her feelings any longer. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. Unable to hold herself together, she moved to a quiet corner and sat down. Covering her face, she tried to steady her breathing, but her emotions refused to settle. Frustration slipped out as she muttered that she was no longer a child. After a short silence, Derrick closed his eyes briefly and spoke in a calm, even tone, saying there was nothing to criticize about her performance. He acknowledged her hard work and that it clearly showed. Alant paused, but her tears did not stop. From behind her hands, she admitted the truth. She had wanted to win more than anything. Yet at the final moment, something had held her back. Even if she had won, she felt that nothing would truly change, and that she would still return to the same place she had always been. Her voice trembled as she expressed how deeply rooted that feeling was within her. Derrick remained silent at first, simply listening. After some time, Alant lowered her hands slightly. Tears still ran down her face, but her expression had calmed somewhat. She spoke again, recalling how even in such an exhausted state, Isoline had still appeared composed and graceful. A faint, bitter smile formed as she admitted that when it came to doubting herself, she felt far ahead of Isoline. Derrick responded quietly, saying he was not much different from her. His words made her pause. He then added something simple, explaining that even if she appeared a little pathetic, it did not matter. Alant looked up at him, her eyes still filled with tears. He met her gaze and explained that if she feared appearing weak, she would never grow beyond where she stood. Hearing that, she covered her face once again, overwhelmed by emotion. She remained there in silence while Derrick stayed beside her, offering no further words. Her thoughts drifted as memories rose and faded like ripples. She pictured Isoline again, standing far ahead, untouched by the darkness that had always followed her. Yet this time, something felt different. For the first time, she no longer felt completely trapped. At a distance, Denise observed the scene quietly before turning her attention back to Isoline. Stepping forward, she approached as Isoline's companions politely excused themselves and left. Denise greeted her with a gentle smile and praised her performance in the duel. Isoline responded softly, though her expression remained thoughtful. After a brief pause, she admitted that something did not feel right and that it did not seem like she had truly won. Denise lowered her gaze slightly, smiling without answering directly. Isoline grew more serious, explaining that the gap between them was not merely about talent. She believed that Alant had already surpassed her in ways that mattered more than skill alone, and the speed of her growth made that clear. As she spoke, Derrick's image suddenly crossed her mind, catching her off guard, and she quickly pushed the thought away. Turning to her maid, she gave a firm instruction to prepare a letter to the main estate. Then she lifted her gaze forward once more, her expression sharpening with renewed resolve.